Hey, everybody, it's me, God's comic, Brad Stine. This is Brad Stine Has Issues, where comedy, conservatism, and Christianity collide in a cacophony of clarity. Boy, do we have a special guest for the last broadcast of 2025. Actually, it's 2024. That's how excited I am about 2025. I'm already there and I'm not there, but I could be because we're taping this. So maybe I've taped this in 2025 and you wouldn't know the difference. Nevertheless, this is our last episode for 2024, and we have a very exciting guest. It's his second time on, and I'm shocked he came on the second time, let alone the first. Stephen Meyer, who wrote the incredible book, The Return of the God Hypothesis, and we brought him back on to finish up this year. He's one of my favorite guests. He's one of my top 10 bucket list guests, and he will close out 2024. This is the New Year's Eve episode. It's a special episode where if you are brand new to Brad Stine Has Issues, a couple things you should know. Number one, 2025 is going to be a whole new, fresh start, and you should know my son, Wyatt Leroy Stine, because if all works right, this will be the last episode that you will only hear his voice, because one of the things we're shooting for next episode is bringing Wyatt on camera. And that's how we're going to run 2025, where you're literally going to not only see and hear my son's face and voice, but also watch him screw up the podcast in real time. Wyatt, welcome to your last audio-only episode.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I might miss the amenity. What do you call it?
That's the incorrect mispronunciation. The correct mispronunciation is anonymity. That would be the correct mispronunciation. The correct pronunciation is anonymity.
Anonymity. Well, it's not my fault they have like 6 eyes in that word.
No, there's none. There's Y's.
Wait, there's no I in that?
Yeah. Spelling is, again, something that, thank God, is not part of something necessary for you to run your version of our podcast, your side of the podcast, your sidekick-ish, producer-ish, director-ish skill set doesn't come with spelling or pronunciation. So you can thank Jesus yourself in your spare time. Do you thank God a lot for your life, and especially for me being your dad?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah. Do you find yourself constantly thanking God and wondering how could you have chosen a better father than me, even if you had tried? If you say that a lot, is that part of your prayer language?
Oh, of course. Who doesn't think of that?
Handsomeness. Does that come up a lot, or do you just figure, hey, I'll leave that to God? He made a masterpiece, broke the mold. I think God knows what a gorgeous. Some people say Adonis-like when they reference me. I hate that. It's embarrassing. I mean, have you ever referred to me like when your friends say, "What's your dad like?" You say, "Well, he has an Adonis good looks." You ever?
No. Specifically, that word has never appeared in any sentence I've ever said.
Can you think of any of the ways that you describe me to your friends, to your fan base, maybe to your workers, compatriots? Of course, you don't work at Lowe's. Folks, if you're brand new to Brad Stine Has Issues, Wyatt was the face of Lowe's for a long time. He loved it. He relished it. He would have stories about it and the joy of their incredible competence in building a juggernaut known as Lowe's, the hardware and or home goods depository. And now he's gone. And do you feel now that 2024 is wrapping up, and of course that was your last year at Lowe's, do you feel a loss? Do you find yourself longing for Lowe's? Maybe.
No, I absolutely do not.
Yeah, but Lowe's Lord, you had some amazing stories.
Yeah, but they weren't ever happy stories, now were they?
Well, they made me happy.
Well, I mean, they made the audience happy, yes,
Yeah.
but they didn't make me happy.
Well, no, they were wonderful stories, though. And you know what? I think that's kind of what this 2024 last episode until we bump into 2025 is all about. It's kind of like trying to remember what we just went through, son. We made it through another year. And you know what? And I found some old archival episodes from maybe 3 years ago when we were in this space, but it was like literally a rack behind me with literal like storage junk because this was just an open, basically hollow space with no drywall, and it didn't have any electrical and certainly had no heat. And there were boxes back there and junk, and I just was trying, and I think you were there, but that's when our audio was suspect, if that's the word you would use. Like our earlier episodes, White. Suspect? You think that's a good pronunciation?
Travesty sounds a lot more like it.
Okay. Well, it was. But hey, we didn't know what we were doing, son. And now we are just more professional and proficient at not knowing what we're doing.
Which makes things messing up that much more tragic.
Tragic and yet more sophisticated. Our mess ups now take new levels of incompetence.
You ain't seen a podcast mess up like we do.
Oh my goodness. There are people, there are classes now, those who go to school for podcastology because they want to get a degree in it. They use our podcast as a template for don't let this happen to you.
Our podcast is basically the before of every single before and after picture you will find in a textbook on podcasts.
We're the fat guy, and then they have the after, and you're thin and robust and stellar and jacked and ripped because you've exercised. But we're the guy eating cake and donuts in the front part going, maybe I should change my lifestyle.
You know, that does bring up a good question, though. Do fat models like the before picture guys, how much less do they get paid than the actual good ones?
Well, I would think they'd get paid more.
I mean,
because, frankly, they're twice. It's like two for the price of one. You're getting two models for the.
I was gonna
You're
say
getting model savvy and girth, and I think both of those deserve to be paid.
I think they'd get paid a bit. They'd have to be paid more because they're the ones who probably don't want to be on the newspaper or in the magazine.
Right. So
you have to bribe them so they actually. The handsome guy, he doesn't need the money. He's got 1 billion jobs lined up. The fat guy, not so much.
Yeah, there's a shame element to it.
Yeah, and I think that should translate into direct monetary compensation.
That's what I'm saying. We need to now. You know, there's this sort of body positivity movement. Have you heard about that, Wyatt?
Oh yeah, don't get me started on that.
No, I want to get you started. Go.
Well, no, because if you get me started, I won't stop.
Wyatt, if you can, just go.
Okay, the whole body positivity thing.
Yeah.
At the surface level,
Right.
Cool idea. If I lose an arm in a dinosaur fight, I don't want to have to go like, man, I can't show my face anymore. I'm hideous. No, but body positivity in that case is fine. However, if Moby Dick personified decides I want to eat another cake, I don't think body positivity is necessarily a good scapegoat for that.
You know why? You were right about one thing.
What?
I shouldn't have got you started.
You really should. I warned you. I tried to warn you.
Listen, your metaphors started with a one-armed guy who lost his arm in fighting a dinosaur. So that metaphor really had me a little backpedaling, trying to find some solid ground.
Look,
to
you
land.
have to
Then we ended up with
stories.
Moby Dick, and
Yeah,
I thought you
you
were
have
going to make some reference to the whale eating this guy's other arm he'd lost initially in a fight with a dinosaur. Come to find out, you were using that as a kind of a pictorial reminiscent of a heftier male model who's the before picture of the before and after. But here's the thing, White. When they do the before and after, normally the after is the same guy. He just lost some weight. So in a way, it's a story of accomplishment. It's a story of overcoming your own girth for the sake of your health, your dignity, your well-being, and launching you into the thin model career that you had always longed for. Though I will say this, the fat model probably is more necessary because, as you said, it's kind of like this. Have you ever seen movies, and in the movie, it's usually in a comedy movie, they will find some old woman or man to represent some like homeless guy, or they'll find some unattractive human to play the unattractive. Oh, it's a blind date. Oh! And this is a real person that went out for an audition and said, listen, what we're looking for is a talented, hideous looking actor, actress, preferably obese, hopefully with incredibly unkempt hair. Greasy would be preferred. A face that would launch not only not a million ships, but would sink whatever two were there. And we're looking for that. And would you like to audition? And here's why. Think of this. You see the hideous person that went out for this role, right? That means they auditioned with a bunch of other heinous looking people, which means people weren't ugly enough to win this part. Just think of that. You're hideous. You can't get a part. You go out for the one thing you can go for, and you weren't even good enough to get that.
You weren't even good enough to be bad.
Wyatt, there's a lot out there that we don't stop and consider.
There really is.
In life. So when you, do you think, like when you see someone who, do you think everybody finds the same people unattractive, or do you think that some folks have a more empathetic filter, that there's no judgment? Do you think that's even possible? Do you think everybody kind of judges somebody when they meet them?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm judging you right now, and I've known you for years.
Yeah, but what would you say people most judge negatively, even if it's subconsciously? I'm not talking about somebody being really unkind and insulting, but would you say unattractive facially would be more, I don't know, a grappling of your engagement with this person? Or do you think it is weight? Because it does seem like there is a lot of prejudice towards overweight people. Wouldn't you say?
I would say that, and I honestly think, ultimately, personal hygiene is the number one. Because similar to weight, it's something that, for the most part, you are in complete control over. So if you don't control it, then that speaks more badly about you than it would be if you were simply, I don't know, had a missing arm because you've suck at dinosaur wrangling. You can't really do much about that.
Yeah.
But you can stand to lose a few pounds.
Yeah. But that's not, but you said hygiene.
I said hygiene and, by extension, weight, because they're both problems that you can solve.
Yeah, but you weren't, by extension, you made it very specific. Hygiene, you felt, was the number one thing that people would like what? Unkempt, unwashed hair?
Body odor, unkempt, things that, again, you can very easily fix.
Do you think they don't care, or is it possible that you have body odor and you don't know?
Well, like I said, for the most part, you can fix it. I'm sure somewhere in a medical textbook, in some university, you'll find a medical condition that you can't do anything about, that just makes you stink all the time. It's probably there. But the fact that you and I have to guess that this exists, instead of us knowing it outright, probably lets you know how uncommon it is.
Well, here's what I'm wondering, though. And I think it's an interesting ethical dilemma, especially for the Christ follower, which is us, right? I mean, we believe Jesus is God, which is, that's a faith statement. There's reasons why we think it makes sense and why it seems to be the most logical, supernatural meets the natural representative of God on earth is Christ, because he was real. He wasn't a mythology. And there were a lot of things that happened in his lifetime that were recorded that don't seem to make sense for a fraud or a charlatan. But the one thing about the Bible, it's very clear about Christianity, is that it expects you to love everyone with a kindness and a grace and a empathy that God shows to us. So we're trying to pass it on. Now, God even goes as far as saying, love your enemy, pray for those who despitefully use you, which I think is one of the most ridiculously difficult and puzzling commands that God would give to somebody. But yet, if you thought about this, if somebody actually took you up on that offer to love your enemies, pray for those that despitefully use you, and everybody did it, wars would be done. There wouldn't be any wars. There wouldn't be any hate. There wouldn't be any thieves. There wouldn't be any murder.
So I wonder why those things are still there.
Well,
makes you think, don't it?
That's what I'm saying, is that
I know,
people...
and I beat you to it. I'm hijacking the podcast.
Wait a minute.
If I'm gonna be on camera,
yeah,
I may as well be the new face of it, because let's be honest here, I'm the talent.
You are the talent, Wyatt. You do buttons, you do voice, you do arms.
And most importantly, you can't. You can't do that stuff. That's why you have me. You literally cannot. You couldn't figure out how a knob works before this recording started. Yeah, that took us 2 takes to get down because you forgot that. That was your own thing you did, and you forgot it and didn't fix it. Come on.
So you're saying that if I don't turn on my headset volume and then I get frustrated because I don't hear the opening song, and then I say to you, why aren't you playing it, and running it through my headset, and then I go, oh, wait, maybe I need to turn it on, and then I do. You're somehow saying that I have some responsibility in that fiasco, that it's not your job to be up there and make sure all the knobs are proper?
Well, if you're changing the knobs, then no. Ultimately, I can make sure that the knobs work.
Yeah.
But I'm not always going to be up there to babysit you and make sure, oh, hey, by the way, if that knob you turned like a week ago, make sure you turn that back.
Well, I did forget. And it does give me some empathy for you for 2025. Yeah, listen, over the years, I've made fun of you kind of every now and again, very lightly. It's not something that anybody would have noticed.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm 10 times worse than you all.
And then some. But here's the thing, son. I have joked about, he doesn't know where the knob is. But the truth is, if there's a lot to go on, and you have to kind of pay attention to make sure everything's getting recorded, and you need to sidekick it and keep it fun and keep it tight, and that's a lot of responsibility. And I don't know that I've always given you credit for how challenging it could be, or that somebody might make a bit of a glitch every now and again. I don't know if I've ever really said, well done, son, this is a lot of work.
Yeah, it's always, he can't press the buttons, but it's never, he sometimes presses the button.
So you're a good representation in real time of the before and after.
I'm
the unkempt actor who feels unloved, unappreciated, and yet was willing to expose themselves as the before shot for the money, but also just to say, hey, I'm
not saying that's me, but what I am saying is if I had violin music that was really sad, I definitely would be playing it right now.
I paid money for that push the button and make funny signs and
we
song.
have yet to do anything. You know what? How about this?
There's no violin on that?
First we can add one, but we don't have one currently. How about this? First New Year's resolution.
Yeah.
Actually use the soundboard.
Well, guess whose responsibility it is to use said soundboard if one felt it was an enhancement to a podcast that at this point I'm kind of running on my own, throwing in all the bells and the whistles verbally with my insight, my funny, my intrigue, because I don't get... Listen, if I had a pad button, I'd be going to town.
If you had a pad button, you'd forget how to turn it on.
Probably.
Much like your headphone knob.
You're right. You know who didn't forget to turn it on, though? Dinesh D'Souza. I was thinking about 2024. I did want to ask all my fans out there, all my friends watching this, and people that do watch the after version, my loyal, like 15 or 20 that show up every single Monday night live. They're my test subjects. So they're ones that literally I listen to and think, what do you guys think about this and that? Because they've been so loyal. Who was your favorite guests of 2024? Would you go ahead and write down in your commentary, hey, I love this guy or that woman or whatever. If you can remember that, maybe even some repartee between White and myself. We're moving to the next year, and so we want to enhance this thing, make it even better this next year to where it becomes a whole new beast. And so I'd love to get your insights. Who did you like? And also, who would you like me to interview next year? Can't guarantee I'll get them, but I'd certainly give it a chance if I think that these are somebody that I might be able to pull off. So if you guys have any ideas out there as to somebody you would like me to try to get into interview, leave the comments right there. And also make sure you get your notification button for this. Please subscribe to Brad Stine Has Issues if you haven't, so we can grow this up. But I was thinking of some of the people that I love. Dinesh D'Souza, I did the movie that came out. It came out in October of this year called Vindicating Trump. It was an entire documentary about what had happened to Donald Trump the moment he went from a beloved, iconic New York figure to I'm going to run for president, and suddenly he's a racist and he's a Nazi and he's a fascist and he's not good at buttons. And I thought to myself, I want to be on this. I was one of the actors on that. And Nick Searcy, who's a well-known actor, was on that. And I even had Nick here, and he was one of the people I interviewed this past year. But Dinesh also had me on his podcast, too. So that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that episode because I do like Dinesh a lot. I've watched him in his interviews and in his debates over the years. A great Christian conservative debater. So he was great. Joy Lynn Massaros, we had her on where she was being sued by the Biden administration over like assault or trying to keep people from voting. And it was all basically lawfare, an attack by our government against a citizen. It was complete fabrication. And then they won that lawsuit, wouldn't drop it when they wanted them to once they realized they were about to lose. And they won that thing in court. And we even did another quick surprise interview with her and did a bonus episode. That was a lot of fun. Bruce Davison. I remember Bruce. He was someone I did a movie called Persecuted. He's an Academy Award Oscar-nominated actor. He's not a believer. And he's left-leaning, but I wanted to say, can left-leaners and right-leaners, can Christians and non-Christians talk, be civil, respect each other, find something in common with each other? And we had him on. That was somebody I really liked a lot. Adam Curry, I just remember him as one of the first, not the actual first original MTV VJs, but I think 2 or 3 years into it. And he was also known as the Podfather. So because this is a podcast, the fact that I was able to interview the guy that kind of started the whole idea of podcasting, I remember that guy. Stephen Bargatze, a comedy magician. My career started as a comedy magician. So I wanted to talk to him. And I've had a few magicians on, if you guys remember. I have a soft spot for magicians, as did Johnny Carson, who was also started out as a magician. So I've had him on, but of course his son, Nate, has become like the biggest touring live comic in the nation. So that was fun to do that and just to talk to his dad. John Schneider, the actor, a movie I was in, last November, not this past one, but the one in 23 when they came out with Jingle Smells, the film, and then it was re-released this year. So that was an exciting thing. Why, can you think of anybody last year that you enjoyed, an episode perhaps that stuck out or anything like that? Can you think of anything?
You took the words right out of my mouth. All of those people. Yep, that's them. Love them all. Yep.
Oh my. Talk about finding a way to not do any kind of research, any kind of that.
It's kind of hard to research stuff you're discovering is the topic. Now,
Wyatt, I'm just gonna roll the dice, and I think all the fans of Brad Stein Has Issues know that this is gonna go nowhere. But I'm gonna roll the dice. Can you think of anybody, not that I've mentioned, I guess, I mean, if you want to say some of these, and maybe some of these guys you actually did like, you're not just making it up, but was there anybody that you did kind of think, oh, they were, I enjoyed that, or I learned something from I mean, you literally can't think of anybody we had on last year, which is what, 4 a week, 4 a month, times it's 48 people. Well, 47, 48 will be today with Stephen Meyer. But you can't think of anybody that's like, oh, I like so-and-so. Nothing?
I mean, I know we've had a bunch of interviews, and I know I enjoyed some of the topics. It's the whole what's their name part that I get confused on. Mm-hmm. I mean, last week's guest was Keith
Thibodeau.
Thibodeau. Thesaurus? Something like that?
Thibodeau. And he
There's
was
no
little
X in Thibodeau. That's not how you...
Actually,
no.
there is an X in Thibodeau.
That is not... No, there was no X sound in so where's the X coming from? Why is English so annoying with that? Quick tangent. English, if you're going to add a letter into a word, give it a point.
Are you anthropomorphizing English?
Yes. More specifically, English teachers. The people, or I guess linguists, I guess.
Okay.
The people who invent the way that
Well,
we...
then you're not anthropomorphizing. You first said English instead of an English teacher. Then at least you're dealing with those who are supposedly...
How do we know that they're human, though? How do we know that these English teachers aren't just AI at this point?
How do you know you're not AI at this point?
Well, that would explain how I am bad at buttons and how I don't remember any of our guests.
So you're saying that you are a brain in a vat, and part of what they programmed you to do is be bad at buttons because somewhere there's an alien who's orchestrated all this on the big screen, and every Tuesday at 4 kukuku, that's what it is in their time frame. There's no o'clock. 4, they watch the Brad Stein Has Issues, and they all sit there and laugh at the sidekick that can never do buttons because that was programmed.
Well, think about it. They can't have me be a perfect person because that would be very suspicious. Might give away the whole game. They gotta give me flaws to help keep the illusion. Yep. I mean, I wish they would have picked better weaknesses.
Now,
like maybe I can't eat chili because it upsets my stomach. I would like that over I can't remember what happened 5 minutes ago.
So even as a false a holographic image, whatever you are, you still feel embarrassment because they programmed that into you to being bad at buttons.
Exactly. I have to be shown as mortal.
Now here's the big question, and I know that you're going to be the right guy to ask for this because there's something I know about you. Well, lots I know about you, son, but one of the things I know about you is you are interested in philosophy. You are interested in sort of science fiction.
Physics is my thing.
You love that stuff, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
So I don't have to elaborate on brain in a vat theorem. You've heard of it, yeah?
I've heard of that theorem,
Okay. And so this idea that perhaps we are this, we're held somewhere by these aliens or the special, higher life forms, and they've created this sort of world where these brains, it's like the Matrix, where the people are all in these, cylinders, whatever. But there's just brains, and we're just indicating to us that we're real, but we're really part of this figment of their imagination, right? And instead, they've just programmed us to think we're living in a real world that we're not, right? And you've heard of that. But what I've never understood was, what if the person, the alien, I guess, or whatever you would call it, that has programmed the vats and made all this fake world, right, that they're watching and laughing and tweaking whenever they feel like it and adding additional dialogue or having a character eliminated, whatever, right, Wyatt? Right, Wyatt?
I think I know where this conversation is going.
How do they know they're not
onto simulation also.
a simulation?
And that could even extend further beyond that. Like, is this just an infinite like layer of different
Infinite-
simulations?
Infinite regress.
Exactly.
Well,
So then, who was the original?
well, that's the God problem, isn't it? That's the one thing,
Yeah.
when I speak about atheists, and they always confuse me. I got to tell you this about atheists. It's not that they choose to be an atheist that confuses me. What confuses me is usually, not always, I'm not talking about internet troll atheists. They are very shallow thinkers, if they can think at all. And all they do is read or watch things from Christopher Hitchens or Richard Dawkins or read their books and then just sort of mimic their phrases and throw them out there or just insult people and then they laugh and think they did something. So I'm not talking about them. These are people that can't think. They're not deep. They're really kind of wasting their lives, frankly, and everybody's time when they jump in because they have nothing of depth or insight to say. I'm not talking about those guys. But the thinking atheists, right? The Richard Dawkins, the Sam Harris, the late Christopher Hitchens or Daniel Dennett, or I don't know, Penn and Teller, or Ricky Gervais, right? Or Pete Singer, or just, the myriad of actual deeper thinkers, right, of atheism. It really always fascinates me that they don't understand certain ideas about, and it's what I always bring up. And it's one of the things I'm going to tell you guys for next year. I'm hoping to do a series about atheism because to me, and this is my premise, it's a religion. And of course, they always say it's not a religion. We just don't believe in God. But I'm using the idea of religion in definition as a synonym for presuppositional worldview because everybody has one. Everybody has a worldview, and that's your religion. But you could say, well, I don't believe in religion. Okay, your philosophy. But philosophy is a religion. Anything you believe that gives you your perspective of the world, how you see it, what you think is true, what you think is false, how you vote, who you're going to marry, how you're going to interact with other people, what kind of morals, if you have any, where do they come from? Anything that really drives your life and gives you pause of contemplation and thoughts about what is true is a religion for the most part. And again, like I said, I know it's not like going to church or having a doctrine that's been locked down that we can read. And I get it. It's different. But to me, ultimately, it's the same. Whatever is your foundational way of seeing the world, it's your religion, for lack of a better term. And those guys have a hard time grasping some very basic things like life has no meaning if we are here by accident. Now, there have been Bertrand Russells and Nietzsche's and so forth who have reached this conclusion. They said, yeah, we're just here, we don't know why, and we became self-aware, and nobody had us in mind, and nobody engineered it, nobody designed it, nobody wrote this book, so we are an accident. The fact we can be self-aware is complete anomaly. The fact we are about to go into eternal oblivion makes this kind of a hell on earth and a nightmare. Why did you let us be aware of ourselves if we know, and then you're going to go into an eternal nothingness? It's like, holy smoke, spooky. But the fact that they don't understand that if there is no absolute ultimate meaning, then there is no meaning at all. You don't get to decide to choose your own meaning and act like that has value. You choose your own meaning. It's meaningful if I do this or do that within the context of your life. Yeah, you choose it, but it doesn't have actual intrinsic value or actual meaning because it's all going to disappear into nothingness and it's irrelevant at that point. They can't grasp that concept. They literally can't. If you say that to them, they go, no, I make my own meaning. They don't understand that if you write a novel, that's a beginning, the middle, and the end of a story. And if you make up your own meaning, all you've done is written a chapter in the novel. But if the novel is burned in a fire, your chapter goes with it. There's nothing here, nothing to read, nothing to contemplate, nothing to understand, nothing that had any teleology, nothing that had any meaning, wasn't purposeful, trying to head to a conclusion. It's all gone. Well, this whole earth, this whole universe is going to collapse on itself, and then everything about us disappears. There's no one to contemplate it, no one to be aware of it. Thus, it means nothing. It has no sustaining value because we are gone. Not only do we not think and are in oblivion, our material just either disappears completely if there is such a thing as the annihilation of material, which I think they believe there isn't. But if it goes back into that sort of singularity and it all squishes down, then I guess maybe our material's in there, but we'll never come back. If atheism is true and Darwinism is true and materialism is true and the closed system is true. But we don't believe that. We believe there is, in fact, God. And he is out there and did give us meaning, and that's why we desire it. So these were some of the people that I got to talk to last year, this year, the final of this year. And one of those was Stephen Meyer, who's we're about to introduce here in just a couple of minutes. But I did want to give you guys a quick update about next year. So hopefully, and there's no promises, but our goal is this. Next Monday will be the first of 2025. We have a very special guest to launch 2025. Her name is Riley Gaines, and she was the swimmer that had to swim against a male opponent she was from the University of Kentucky. And she's become an advocate for women's sports, getting men out of women's sports, and she's a Christ follower, she's a conservative, and she's going to launch 2025. So I'm really excited to have her. Please tell your friends, send links to your friends. Let's grow this podcast. Let's see if we can get ourselves, hundreds of people watching us live on Monday nights. Let's see if we can get ourselves 100,000 subscribers on YouTube this 2025 year. Let's see if we can make some monetary income so that we can grow this. Because I do want to have a series on atheism and have special segments that why it's going to edit, why it's going to grow into my producer, and we're going to put that onto social media. We also want to have a pro-America series, and I'm talking to a group out there that is very much connected and understands the Christian heritage of America and our constitutional beginnings. And so there's no guarantee yet, but I'm going to talk to them about maybe sharing brands. So they're going to help maybe produce and edit my pro-America rants, and then it'll be on their platform as well as ours. I'm hoping those will come out at least once a month, if not once a week, next year in 2025. Cultural clips, where I do my original Brad Stine Has Issues rants, where I talk about a cultural issue. You've seen some of them. We played some of them here, but you've seen them on YouTube. So I want to bring those back. I really try to hopefully make it insightful, inspiring, but funny, along with some depth. And that, I think, will make me unique, right? There's either the deep PragerU stuff or there's the funny guy. I want to be a hybrid of those two. That's what the original Brad Stine Has Issues was trying to do. And, I don't know. I'm going to try it again, but this time on our stage. Also, by the way, my hope is that our backdrop's going to be a little changed. My wife was very frustrated. She thinks it's convoluted, and I'm like, I just throw stuff back there because that's how I roll. But she wants to try to clean it up, make it a little bit more tight for next year, a little bit different. We're going to add a few bells and whistles to here. You won't even be able to see it, though. What we should do maybe is film us walking into the studio and showing all you guys everything, and then showing a clip of that. So those of you who've not visited, there's only been only two fan viewers that have ever been in this studio. That was Ashley Haas, who's watching as we speak, and St. Nicholas Kress, who was not only here, but he also was at the taping of Laugh While It's Legal, my next album, which hopefully will be around next year as well. So that's an exciting thing, and we're seeing if there will be a platform that will play it. If not, we'll figure out where it's going to show or how you can get a hold of that as well. Also, if you are a subscriber to Brad Stine Has Issues and you join the mighty 10,000, you need to re-up for next year, so it's $36. And by the way, if you are a special forces or paid the extra money, got the shirts, got all this stuff, to renew for next year, it's only $36. You don't have to pay the higher end. You already have access to downloading my comedy. You've already taken it if you have, or at least have access if you didn't. So you got the merch and whatever, so you don't have to pay more for all that extra stuff because you already got it. We just need to re-up, and this money will go towards production for paying Wyatt and different folks that are help that make these things possible with the hope of growth. Look to bradstein.com. I'm going to be in around this nation with Salem Network. They're going to sponsor 5 of my comedy tours. There will be other places I'm going to be touring. There's a brand new show I'm trying to put together that I hope will also be part of something that I can do for churches. And I will tell you a little bit more about that once I kind of feel like I'm getting that up and running. Let's see. Well, and then like I said, I'll probably do some response videos. Those are very popular where you play somebody saying something and then you respond to it. I did one on atheists and Ricky Gervais a while back, and people seem to enjoy that. So these are just kind of some of the things I'm trying to do for next year. If I would love to do some funny sketches. Those are really hard to do, so we'll see if those pan out, maybe 1 or 2. We'll just see if we can do it. Like I said, Wyatt's going to suddenly be, it's been fun playing the you never get to see Wyatt thing, and he was here as a ghost with a sheet and his arm shooting up or his leg shooting up. And that was fun, but I think that's played its course. Every podcast I've ever seen that is dynamic and people seem to like, and there are different people in repartee, you see them. And Wyatt deserves to be seen. I think it'll make for more interesting interaction if you see him talking to me and then me talking. So I don't know why. Is that going to be like side to side while we shoot that whole banter? Is that how it will look? Do you know yet?
Potentially. I'm still trying to work out how that's going to work.
Well, what else could it be, son?
It could be sort of cut to whoever's currently talking.
Okay.
But
and is that something you got to do in post, or will it happen automatically on the software?
Most likely something we do in post.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, anyways, that's what we're going to, so I think that'll make it a little bit more dynamic. I really appreciate all you guys have done in building Brad Stine Has Issues. My hope is always been, that what I'm doing here is fun and funny, informative, inspiring. I hope sometimes it convicts you. I hope if you watch this and you're not a believer in God, that it kind of drives you that direction, or at least makes you think differently. I hope that it is something that can be helpful to somebody in trouble, in despair. I hope it's a community that you guys have enjoyed. I have always said to you guys, and I hope you know how sincere I am when I say thank you, especially for those who've watched for a couple years now, for coming in here every Monday. You're giving up your life and your time for my podcast, and my hope is that it is a ministry that makes sense to you and you feel like it's worth it. I hope you enjoy the conversations you have with each other and become kind of internet friends, and maybe beyond that. Who knows? I don't know if some of you have tried to connect to each other in real time. God bless you if you did. That's fun. That's cool. But the whole point is this: as we close up 2024, this podcast has gone above and beyond anything I could have ever imagined when I started during the Corona crazy 3 years ago or more. And I do want to see if it can be something that really makes it different in this new season in America. We're going to have a new presidential administration, unless something goes crazy that we don't see coming yet. And I'm really excited about just my live events, my new show that I want to bring to churches, and just be inspirational, but also driving the church to become disciples, because that's the key. If the church actually becomes true, committed disciple believers, we might just, in fact, change the world. We might just, in fact, watch a third great awakening in the United States. We might just, in fact, watch God show mercy on us when we start taking it seriously and appreciate this little window. As Carol Swain, one of our favorite guests, said, we've been given a reprieve, and we owe God everything for that. And so that being said, I wanted to show a quick clip of a comedy routine that I did a number of years ago, but it was about animals and evolution. This is a theme I've done a few times. I did it and put a helmet on, but I also did it in wussification, and it's a fun sort of laugh, I hope, to end 2024, and then we will bring on our guest, and it will make sense, because that's his specialty, intelligent design. So, for right now, guys, have a laugh on me for 2024. Here's a clip from wussification dealing with Darwinism. What else did God celebrate? Animals! They're given to us for food, for clothing. And if you've lost spouses, sometimes it's given them great comfort. It's a wonderful gift from God. You should love animals, but they're not your children. If you believe in God, there's a hierarchy. He made animals first, and then he made us, and he said, hey, have dominion over them. Treat them well. Be nice to them. But only humans are made in my image. Or you believe in Darwin. You've accepted Charles Darwin into your heart as your Lord and Savior. So evolution means that the animals are in fact equal to you. If you believe in evolution, you can't have pets because you're equal and you own them. Isn't that slavery? You see, it matters what you believe about God. Funny to me, too. Because people love them, and you should. You just don't lose perspective. I've seen people do it. There's little puppies, and they're like, oh, they're my kids. What? They're my kids. Their kids puke on the carpet and eat it? That's weird. Okay, why is your kid dragging her butt up and down the swing? I want to know. Huh? Maybe put a diaper on the kid, because that's stinking weird, lady. I'm just saying that. Shave its face. I want to see who it looks like if that's your kid. I love it when people that have animals do evil things to them, but they give it nice words to trick the animal into thinking it's being nice. Oh, we had him fixed. We had him fixed. No, you had him broken, really. Yeah, no, he was working fine till you got a hold of him, I'll tell you right now. Yes, sir, he's no good. Well, we had to put him to sleep. Okay, no, you put him to bed, really, is what you did. Wake him up, I'll show you what I'm talking about. There's the difference. Okay. That's what you call putting to sleep. Remind me not to let you babysit my kids. Can you do me that? Unbelievable. Difference in who they are, what they look like, what they're about. They're animals. Good, special. We can own them because they're below us. I wanted to have a pet growing up. My dad wouldn't get me. Never would get me a pet. You know what I had? I had a fish for like a week. Threw in the ping pong ball, got the fish. I was 8. I didn't know what to do. He was in the water. I figured he was cold all the time. I'd bring him out, let him dry off now and again. I didn't. He loved it. He would just dance. It's my favorite part of the whole show. Right there. No, crying out loud. You know what I wanted? I wanted a dog. I'm a boy. I got to have a dog. You know what I asked for my dad? Give me a dog. You know what he gave me? Silent dog whistle. Silent stinking dog whistle. You know what those are? Right? You know what it is, right? This is Georgia. Anybody? 16? Any ideas? No. Look at it. No. Not more questions! See, silent dog whistle, I used to buy these in the back of comic books. You could buy a comic book for like a dime. Not that long ago. And they had, the back section had the coolest things. You wouldn't believe. See, you'd think you're modern. Nothing. I could buy a submarine, $2. Submarine! X-ray specs, 50 cents. Put on these glasses. You could look right through and see people's bones. What? Isn't that why all the boys bought the X-ray specs? So they could do anthropology? Who knows what a stinking silent dog whistle is? Just the... What is it?
It's a silent dog whistle. You can't hear it, but the dogs can.
That's it. That's all. Silent dog whistle. That's what it is. If you don't know what it is, you blow into it, and it will create this sort of hyper supersonic sound that human beings cannot actually pick up on, but dogs can, and they're supposed to come a-running. And by the way, if you ever had a silent dog whistle, the first thing you found out immediately was, it doesn't work! It never worked! And it occurred to me one day, some guy has been making millions of dollars off of a whistle you can't hear. Is it me, or is this the longest running scam in product development history? This guy should have had a whole product line of worthless junk if we're that kind of a rube. Hey, it's a new flashlight with no bulb. Finally, a flashlight designed for daytime use only. I have to finish this final podcast of 2024 with a glaring error.
Your own don't push the buttons moment.
Wyatt, I went to that clip and said, hey, this is from Wussification. And it's not. It's from God's comic. Oh, my goodness. Wyatt.
Ooh, is that really the note you want to end this year on?
Yeah, I'll tell you why. Because we've spent most of our episodes making fun of your mistakes. And so why not in 2024 with my own mistake, misspeaking my own comedy album.
Yep.
But nevertheless, that's what it was from. But why do I bring that up? I wanted you to hopefully have a laugh. Of all the clips we show, God's comic seems to be one of the least ones that we show. But that being said, it also dealt with the idea of I've always wrestled with neo-Darwinism, evolution. How did this work? Why does it work? What would God have used this thing? And because the intelligent design movement and one of its key leaders in that movement is Stephen Meyer, I just felt like it'd be a perfect segue to open up this second conversation we've had with him in our years about his incredible ministry as just a doctorate, an intelligent man that speaks to the proof that God must be real because everything we see indicates there's a design element to it. They now make predictions on intelligent design, which is one of the ways that you can tell if something is scientifically valid. Can it make predictions that come true? And that gives it some sense of weight, that it must have some truth aspects to it, because it is, so we're saying if this is true, this should happen. And then it does. So that's exciting. For example, junk DNA. For a long time, we heard we have junk DNA, and intelligent design said, no, it would have had a purpose. There's a reason. And now we're finding out that there is no junk DNA. It all has very important purposes for what it does. So anyways, that's part of what we experience. We are closing up 2024 right now. I hope that things are exactly different when we get there. We still have some things to tweak with Wyatt on the lighting and making sure the camera works. So it's possible that he's not going to be here next week. If we still feel like there's a tweak, we want to do it just right. But 2025 is going to be different, better, more robust, with much more commitment to growing this into something that we hope really has some impact culturally, in the philosophical sense, certainly in our faith sense, and just helps people find God, purpose, meaning, and a way to see the world that they can feel completes what they're looking for and the piece perhaps that they're missing. So a lot to expect from a podcast, but why not? If it's your own podcast, why not shoot for the stars? And if you only land on the moon, you're still a pretty darn high. Folks, thank you once again for watching us, being so loyal. Can't wait to see you in 2025, where everything hopefully will begin a whole fresh new race to the finish. We'll see what God has in store for us. Have a happy, happy New Year. Thanks again for being here, and please enjoy our final interview for 2024 with one of my favorite guests, Stephen Meyer. How do you do, sir?
Very well. Thanks for having me on again, Brad. And I think it's just desperation that I would stoop again to come.
I guess, well, trust me, I'm the one that is fully aware of my lack of mental acumen to keep up with you, my friend. But that's the good news. That's what the body is. Everybody gets an expertise. And maybe if you ever watch my work and get a little chuckle, then that's my point. That's what I give back to you. But if not, that's fine. You're here to talk about you. And, last time we were discussing, I think it was when the Return of the God hypothesis had pretty much just come out. So, we were touting that book and it was amazing and wonderful as well of all of your work. But I realized that there was a lot of ground that I wanted to cover that I think is really important. And the hardest thing for me to do as an interviewer is I always try to do the impossible, which is see if I can find questions you've never been asked before. That's always my goal. I want to find another angle so it interests you. I always feel like if I was interviewing Paul McCartney, I wouldn't ask him about the Beatles because it's like this guy has got to be sick after 50, 60 years.
Talking about 1964.
Yeah. Can I move on, please, from writing yesterday in 1963? But, sometimes we do have to talk about some of the things that you talk about regularly because it's the classics. It's what people expect from you because it's what you are most known for and where your expertise is really crucial in culture at this point. But I did want to try it in two sections, if you don't mind. So the first section is going to be mainly about your wheelhouse, which is the neo-Darwinian synthesis in comparison to the intelligent design realm that you are one of the champions in. But after that, we're going to move to the second section, which is in a much more mysterious and mystical place that is equally true and real, but hard to understand. And that, of course, will be the metaphysical realm of the mind and how that comports to reality and to the biology of the human species. So that's kind of the tact I'm taking. And as a comic, I'll probably fail miserably. I'm an idiot. But the good news is I can always bail out and say, what do I know? I'm a comic. But let's start with this. I want to try to see if I can find some synopsis ideas about Darwinism and neo-Darwinism and intelligent design so that not only will be of interest to people, but we can make little clips to send out in social to give people kind of a synopsis of some of the ideas that maybe they're curious about, almost like a Cliff Notes version of some of these big ideas, so they can have a quick version of, oh, that's a way to attack that or to navigate that idea. So I'm going to do it through what has always intrigued me and confused me and use it as my tactic to see if we can discover some interesting quick ways, if you can, to discover these ideas. So let's start with this, if we can. I want to first understand if my perspective is accurate. And that is that there is a difference between macroevolution and microevolution. And I've always interpreted that to mean that macro meant transspeciation, like suddenly a frog becomes a bird or something, where they literally become a whole different species would be the macro. Everything is evolving from this one thing and turning into everything. Whereas the micro, I think, and this is where you can help me, is more of another way simply to say adaptation, that species will adapt to things, doesn't change their species, but they just might get a little bit longer here, a little shorter here, whatever, and this and that. So A, B, C, let's just put them all into one giant, all the alphabet. Is that an accurate description of macro and micro?
Yeah, roughly so. I'd suspend just at the outset of the answer the notion of species, because that's I think the more fundamental thing at stake is transformations in form or body plan. Okay, we know that one species can change enough to become another species because species is at the lowest level of the biological classification hierarchy. So a change in species represents a very small change in biological form, whereas a change in class or phylum, it represents a huge change in biological form. We'll come back to that. The distinction between macro and microevolution is not something that proponents of intelligent design invented. It's not something that young Earth creationists invented. It's a distinction that has been made within evolutionary biology itself. And for a long time, the idea was that small-scale microevolutionary variations could accumulate over a long enough period of time to generate large-scale macroevolutionary transformations in form. Since beginning about the 1980s, maybe even a little before, with the advent of ideas like punctuated equilibrium by Stephen Gould, and now a whole series of new post-neo-Darwinian theories of evolution. More and more evolutionary biologists themselves are doubting that you can extrapolate from small-scale variations to generate large-scale transformations. So things like the Galapagos finches, where you have small-scale changes in the shape or structure of the beak of a finch in response to varying weather patterns. These kinds of adaptations to an environment, which is, you used the right term there, are well documented. And that's microevolutionary change. The problem with extrapolating that to account for the large-scale changes in form that we see attested in the fossil record, for example, when you go from birds to or reptiles to dinosaurs to birds, whatever, those kind of big changes require an input of new genetic and other forms of biological information to account for the large-scale changes that occur. And what's happening in adaptation is the opposite. Rather, you have a parent population that it maybe gives rise to offspring that are separated into daughter populations. And those daughter populations typically will have some, but not all, of the original complement of genetic information. So they end up looking different from each other. There's a differentiation, but there's an overall loss of information over time as you go from parent to daughter population A versus daughter population B. And a lot of what's going on in adaptation is that type of differentiation at the expense of original genetic information. And so that's the problem. You can't extrapolate from a process that's running downhill from the standpoint of genetic information to account for abrupt stepwise increases in biological form and information, the kind of information that would be needed to build new forms of life as we see it in the fossil record. So that's just one of the problems. There are other things that are constraining how much change can take place. And we could talk more about those, but there are actual mechanisms that impose the original form and prevent it from getting altered too much because lest the organism die altogether. So I talk about a lot of these in my book, Darwin's Doubt, something called developmental gene regulatory networks, which are literally circuits controlling the flow of genetic information. And this circuitry inside living organisms that controls the development of an organism from embryo to fully developed mature form, this genetic circuitry is it's essentially immutable. You cannot change the core elements that make up this regulatory circuitry without destroying the animal and preventing it from reaching that full maturity. And so but we know that you have to have that kind of circuitry to build a new body plan. So if you want to if you've got a body plan of an animal, something like an arthropod with a hard exoskeleton, and you want to turn that animal into, say, a chordate with an internal notochord or spinal cord, completely different body logic, completely different way of organizing body parts and tissues. So if you want to make that kind of radical transformation, we know that you've got to change the developmental gene regulatory network, the circuitry that's controlling the expression of the products of the genes, and turning on the right genes at the right time so that you get that final animal output. Well, if you have a circuit that's responsible for body plan A, and you want to turn body plan A into body plan B, that means you got to change circuit A into circuit B. But the one thing we know from the experiments that have been conducted in developmental biology, including at places like Caltech, is that you can't change that internal circuitry very much at all without destroying the development of the animal. And if the animal is destroyed during development, it ceases to become a viable organism that could be selected by natural selection and have its variations passed on. So it's a big problem of immutability of fundamental form. How do you get from body plan A to body plan B if you can't change the circuitry that's responsible for building body plans in the first place?
So is that sort of similar to irreducible complexity, basically, that you can't.
It is in a way irreducible complexity is a slightly different thing, but this would be it's quite similar, but it's the problem of the non-viable intermediate forms. This has been a problem in biology going all the way back to the French anatomist Cuvier, who preceded Darwin, and it was a problem that Darwin was very worried about. There's many examples of this in biology, where if you start to change something, the intermediate on the way to something new is not viable and therefore not selectable by natural selection. Natural selection selects for functional advantage. If you destroy function as you're getting from A to B, then there's nothing for natural selection to select and preserve, and the evolutionary process shuts down at that point. So, so anyway, that's a bit more biological detail than maybe you want, but all that to underscore the point that the micro versus macro evolutionary distinction is real.
Yeah.
It's not something that was invented by creationists with white shoes thumping their Bibles in places like, no, I won't say Tennessee, because that's where you are. But okay, I mean, this is the caricature of that term that's used, that this is sort of a creationist term, but actually this is something that came out of evolutionary biology itself, recognizing the distinction between adaptation and fundamental transformation. And there are mechanisms like the problem of mutating genetic developmental gene regulatory networks that are actually at work resisting fundamental change in organisms and imposing a stasis on fundamental form. So and that says not only is the distinction between micro and macro real, it says that you cannot extrapolate from microevolutionary variation running downhill informationally to an account of the origin of fundamentally new forms of life, which requires an input of information and would also require an alteration of things that don't want to be altered, that are necessary to building the biological form in the first place.
Not having the scientific background that you do and the depth of the specifics that are necessary in chemistry and in biology and whatever at the highest levels of academia, which I'm certainly not in that area, it forces me to be more of a just a contemplative. Like, I just try to think of this idea and say, this doesn't make sense to me, but just because it doesn't make sense could simply be because I'm ignorant, because I'm not educated in this area. But let me give you an example where I'm getting at. So I made a joke about about evolution actually years ago in one of my albums, and it was mocking the whole idea of animal rights and how, we can't give a right to an animal because it's a philosophical concept based on the fact you realize you exist and know you can die. You actually know it. It doesn't happen. So it's me trying to mix philosophy with comedy or whatever. But I made this statement, and I'd love to get your, as an expert on this, thoughts about this. That bothered me. And it was this idea about adaptation over time, or evolution, I guess is what they would call it. And so I made it very simple, but it was like, yes, after millions of years, this bug evolved this camouflage so it could defend itself from its predators. And I said, it took millions of years. What did it do in the meantime? Try to reason with its predator? I'm just a twig. I was trying to figure out what it did in the meantime. And here was my other idea. And again, it's simply, I'm just trying to use logic, I guess, or inductive reasoning, is if it took 1 million years, let's say, for this bug to evolve this leaf-looking evolutionary adaptation, it didn't need it, because it made it for 1 million years. So what's the point of it turning into a leaf if I made it this far without the leaf? So that never made sense to me. It felt like they were reverse engineering. That looks like a leaf, like the leaf it's on. So since it's here, it must have adapted to that, and that's why it's still here. It's like, but it had to take too much time to get there, and it made it without it. So it feels like it's a
it's an ex post facto so story, right?
So what am I missing in that perspective?
I don't think you are really. There are many examples of this. This is another example of the idea of non-functional intermediates. To make all the genetic changes that would be required I'm no expert on camouflage, but I suspect, as is the case with many biological systems, to make all the genetic changes that would be required to generate what are often called evolutionary novelties, you're going to need a lot of time. And you're going to have to go through a lot of intermediate phases that confer no functional advantage.
Right.
And so there's nothing there for natural selection to select in those intermediate, among those intermediate structures that would arise. Now, it turns out that this problem is, and this is something I do know a lot about, this problem of non-functional intermediates arises with a vengeance at the very lowest level of biological change, which is trying to mutate or change one protein structure called a protein fold into another protein structure or fold. And the reason that's important is that biological change at the smallest level is denominated in the origin of new proteins. Proteins do all the most important jobs in the cell. And if you have a stable structure called a fold that enables a chain of amino acids to do a particular job or suite of jobs, and you want to get that to make another protein fold that does another job or another suite of jobs, and you begin to randomly mutate the amino acids that make the chain that form the folded protein. After very few amino acids, after very few changes in the amino acid sequence as a result of random mutation, far fewer than would be needed to build a new fold, you end up unraveling the stability of that protein. And an unraveled protein that no longer has a stable fold is incapable of performing any function at all. So you drop from a peak of function into abyss of non-function before you ever get to a new function or a new plateau of possible.
Yeah, right.
So
Well,
it's
and
the
usually-
same so you see this problem repeated over and over and over again in biology.
Yeah.
And it was anticipated by the great biologists of the late 18th and early 19th century who preceded Darwin, Cuvier in particular, the problem of non-functional intermediates, non-viable intermediates. And what we're finding is that it applies at the very most foundational level in biology, the gene, protein, what's called the gene expression system. When you have mutations in DNA, they affect the sequences of amino acids that make the stable protein structures. And if you accumulate too many of them randomly, you're gonna lose the stability of that fold. And so these proteins structures that are crucial to everything that happens in life are highly isolated from one another in what technically is called amino acid sequence space. Which is just a way of referring to all the different ways there are of arranging the amino acids. There are very few that give you structurally stable proteins that can perform jobs. And they're highly isolated from one another in the sense that if you begin to change the amino acids, you drop into these abysses of non-function long before you've made enough changes to get to a new protein fold.
And the non-function is usually dilatory, right? I mean, isn't it usually a mutation usually is destructive?
Well, the mutations we can actually quantify it, that random mutations typically increase it's something called the Gibbs free energy. It's a thermodynamic term, but there's a quantitative measure, a quantitative amount of destabilization that occurs with each mutation. And when you get too much of it, you lose the fold structure that enables the protein to do its job.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's the mutations have a quantifiable amount of deleterious effect if random. Now there's an exception to that, and that is that if the protein is under what's called selective pressure, if it's in an organism and it's doing something, then you can accumulate more mutations than usual, but you're doing so only because natural selection is preserving just those mutations that maintain the stable fold. So natural selection, as in the example I gave a minute ago with the gene regulatory networks, it actually acts to preserve form, not to alter form dramatically. Anyway, that's again more technical. What I would have said if I'd have been smart and answered better your first question was just to make a simple distinction that I think is very helpful. A lot of people find very helpful. Natural or evolution has at least three different meanings. It can mean change over time. And that refers to the small scale adaptation of things like the Galapagos finches, or to the fact that if you look back in the fossil record, you see evidence of plants and animals that don't live on the planet today. I have a grandson who's fascinated with dinosaurs at 4 years old, as I was. Dinosaurs do not exist today on planet Earth, so there's been change over time. Nobody disputes those meanings of evolution, change over time. A second meaning is the idea of continuous biological change over time, and that relates to the Darwinian idea of universal common descent, where he depicts the history of life as a great branching tree, where the organisms at the base of the tree are very simple, maybe one-celled organisms, and then you've had this process of gradual morphing and changing over long periods of time, producing all the forms of life we see today. That's sometimes called the theory of universal common descent or universal common ancestry. So it's a picture of the history of life, and that's sometimes called evolution as well, but it's a different kind of change that's implied by that picture of the history of life. It's continuous and gradual change over long periods of time. And a third meaning of evolution refers to the process by which that change allegedly occurred. And that's where you get the idea of natural selection acting on random variations and mutations. That's allegedly the engine of that continuous gradual biological change, the mechanism. So you've got a pattern and a process. Now, evolution number one, just change over time, is not controversial at all. Pretty much everyone accepts it. We can see it happening. We see the differences in life forms in the fossil record. Evolution number two is controversial, increasingly so, but even some proponents of intelligent design accept the idea of universal common ancestry, but they dispute the idea of the evolution number three, the idea that there's an undirected, unguided process, namely natural selection acting on random variations, that produces all that change. I myself am deeply skeptical about evolution number two, universal common descent. I think what we have is discontinuity in the fossil record and discontinuity in the genomic, I guess you could call it record, in the evidence we have from the genomes of different organisms. And like all proponents of intelligent design, I'm profoundly skeptical of the idea that there's an undirected, unguided mechanism that produces, as the evolutionary biologists will say, the appearance, but not the reality of design. You may remember the famous quote from Richard Dawkins from his book, The Blind Watchmaker, that the title kind of tells it all. And his quote was, "Biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a
Well,
purpose."
and that's just I think that's where, as a layman, Dr. Meyer, I'm just so confounded by their branch of logic, their branch of logic, because it appears to be disconnected from objective logic. And what I mean by that, and if I just reference back to my camouflage joke or whatever, is that it doesn't make sense to me. If it needed the camouflage to survive and it took 1,000,000 years or 10 million years to get there, then it didn't need the camouflage to survive because it survived for 10 million years.
Before it
So
had
it feels like it's a catch-22 or a disconnect. And so in that regard, so that's why I said, for somebody like you with a PhD or a Dawkins, who would be completely defending this perspective, I'm like, this doesn't make sense. So either I'm too stupid, or there's something that you guys can't come to grips with, but because you have made a commitment to a closed system and a materialist universe, you have no option but to obfuscate how you reach a conclusion, because it simply doesn't hold up in a chain of illogical events. Something broke, and you don't accept it because you won't allow a design to come in. So you have no option but to go crazy with your conclusion. And that's why I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt that I'm the idiot doesn't understand the sophistication of this thing, but it just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, let me come back in a minute and defend you on what you've just said near the end here about the way in a sense, philosophically, the books are cooked. If you commit yourself to a strictly materialistic explanation for everything, and there's actually a principle of method that many scientists, and particularly evolutionary biologists, affirm, and that's the idea of, they call it methodological naturalism. Methodological naturalism. It's a mouthful even for me. And the idea there is that if you're going to be a scientist, you must explain everything by reference to purely materialistic processes, including the origin of the universe, the origin of life, and the origin of new forms of life. Well, if you decide that from the outset, then something very much like evolutionary theory has to be true. If you've decided that the only scientific explanations are explanations that are tendered by reference to or in terms of undirected material processes, you will get some sort of undirected material process as your best explanation for the origin of life. But you precluded by definition, your definition of science, the possibility of a non-materialistic, that is a mental or intelligent or cause, a creative intelligence playing a role in the origin or history of life or the origin of the universe. And yet you haven't provided evidence against that possibility. You've just precluded it from the outset by definition. So
Yeah.
so I think you're onto something there. But I also want to defend our evolutionary colleagues, because this idea of apparent design is not really illogical, because they're making a claim which, if true, would be extremely clever and powerful. And this was the essence of the Darwinian revolution. Because in the 19th century, all biologists accepted that there was design prior to Darwin. And they did so because they saw this evidence of adaptation, where they saw that organisms seem to be well adapted to their environment. So if you live in a very cold climate, if you've got I always use the example of a sheep herder in the far north of Scotland, and he's got a flock of sheep, and he wants to breed a woollier breed of sheep. What's he do? Well, he uses selective breeding. He chooses the woolliest male and the woolliest female, and he allows them to breed. And then he does that generation after generation after generation. And after, say, 20 generations, he's got a really woolly breed of sheep, woolly enough to be like the ones on VeggieTales that used to fall over. They had so much, they were so puffy. So, but what's the mode of action there? Well, it's the breeder selecting the attributes in each generation that he wants to maximize. So it's a form of intelligent selection.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what Darwin did was he came along and he said, well, what if instead of, this wasn't his example, but I'm appropriating his logic to this example. He said, what if there was a series of very cold winters such that only the woolliest males and females survived? Now, if only the woolliest males and females survived, then only those would mate. And then in each successive generation, you get a slightly woollier breed of sheep. And after 20 generations, you'd have exactly the same outcome. But now it's not the intelligent selection of the breeder driving the process. It's nature doing it, because you've had this change of environment that is affecting the same outcome as if it had been designed by an intelligence.
Right.
And so that's the idea of apparent design, that you have an undirected, unguided process that's producing or mimicking the powers of a designing intelligence.
Right. I got you. Well, but this is another
so
incongruity to me. Because it also presumes something. If, let's say, we use that naturalistic serendipity, that, because they had more wool and there was a lot of cold winters, they're the ones that made it and survived. Okay, well, how did they get more wool in the first place than these other guys? It's always this crapshoot that somebody accidentally ends up with something that happens to keep them around. That to me was the camouflage thing. Is not only does it have to mutate into something that is helpful, but it has to literally do it under the auspices of the environment this thing hangs out in, and accidentally look like that leaf that looks different than every other leaf that's out there. It just seems impossible. It seems so arbitrary.
What you're on to now is the fundamental question is, how do you build those adaptations? What's the where does
without thinking about it, where does
the information come from to tell the organism to produce that greater amount of that thicker wool? Now, we know of lots of processes of adaptation. This gets back to the information question I was talking about before, where you do see the maximization of certain traits. But what we now know is that there was information for building those traits latent in the organism in what's called the genotype all along. And the changes in environment activated the production of those of that latent genetic information. And this is something, a new theory of biological change.
So are you saying, I don't mean to interrupt you, but are you saying then that the woollier sheep, let's use that example.
Yeah.
Woollier sheep had inherent in its genetic blueprint.
Endowment. Yeah, exactly.
It had that. It hadn't triggered It just happened to be the mutation happened to have been inculcated into its DNA architecture,
Two things.
and then the coldness triggered it somehow.
Yeah. Let's set the mutations aside for the moment, because what we're finding is that there's pre-programmed adaptive capacity in organisms, and that most of what we observe as adaptation is the product of a kind of biological change that's under an algorithmic control, where there's a signal coming from the environment, and that triggers the upregulation or downregulation of certain genes or hot spots on the gene. And so the capacity for the adaptation was there all along, and it's been triggered by the environment. And
But you have to then presume that it mutated this aberration and held on to it, though it had no value yet, until it accidentally had a cold thing that could trigger it. So again, I hope I don't look like an idiot. It seems so counterintuitive to actual logic and reason from what we do understand as human beings when it comes to design, that this clearly, there was a plan here. It doesn't.
The question that this is a new theory of evolution called natural genetic change that's been natural genetic engineering, rather, that's been developed by the great evolutionary and cell biologist James Shapiro at the University of Chicago. But it raises a fundamental question, which is, where does the pre-programming come from? That's something that he doesn't answer. Now, his whole approach there is that he says, look, mutations are non-random. They're not random in the Darwinian sense. In fact, a lot of this change takes place without mutations per se happening, because what's happening is a triggering of a pre-existing genetic program for adapting to certain sorts of environmental changes. Now, there are mutational processes. We know that mutations occur. These can be random changes in the genetic text, if you will. But those are the ones that are strictly limited by this problem I was talking about before, as far as which is the problem of protein evolvability. How do you evolve the proteins are the main product of genes. There's also regulatory RNAs and so forth, but proteins are the main product of genes, and they're subject to losing function altogether after a very small number of random changes. And that raises the question of, how do you get from protein fold A to protein fold B? So there are changes that we see taking place that do not really, strictly speaking, involve mutations, or if they are involving mutations, they're non-random. That takes you back to the question of the pre-programming that makes that type of adaptation possible, which really leads you to evidence of design at that level. Or the other option is that you do have random mutations. Where you do see random mutations, they're strictly limited in their output, or in the extent to which they can be genuinely creative. They will, after a short period of time, more likely be destructive. So you've got these two different cases, but neither of them suggest that you have random mutations selected by chosen by natural selection, producing fundamentally new forms of life. The mutation selection mechanism is now increasingly understood to lack creative power.
Okay. Well, this also then, let's kind of continue on this tack, but I think that we're going to, because I want to head towards the transcendental argument.
Yeah, sure. Well, can I make just one last point to complete the thought? That
sure.
The Dawkins quote about biology being the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. That's not really an illogical claim. It might be that there is a materialistic process that can produce the same types of outcomes that a mind can do. And at the level of small scale adaptation, we think there is. Okay. So at that level, yes, you have design without a designer, if you will, in the process that is at work in activating a pre-existing design. Okay. You don't really get rid of, you don't eliminate the role of design in the whole story, but in the process of adaptation, that can occur because of these environmental influences. So, but the question is this small scale adaptation the only evidence of design that we have? Or are there other evidences, and can those be explained by mutation and natural selection? And what we're finding is, no, there's lots of other evidences of design. The circuitry in cells, irreducibly complex molecular machinery, the origin of genetic information and the genetic program in the first place, and natural selection and random mutation do not explain those things well. They do not explain what you need for large scale, macro, back to your earlier question, innovation in the history of life. So,
Well,
there's a limited sense in which Darwinism works and is true, or neo-Darwinism, and even its attempt to even the talk about apparent design versus real design, that works. But the question is, does that work for everything? Can that process explain everything that we need to explain in the history of life? And the answer there is no. So that's really an empirical question. It's not inherently illogical, but it doesn't pass the test of
yeah.
experience.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying, and that is true. But I think it gives up a lot of ground that I don't think they really can lay claim to. And what I mean is philosophically. And here's what I'm
Right,
getting at.
right.
I think that the thing that's interesting to me about Darwinism is that, and this is where you're great. Your expertise is in the very specifics of the genomes and that element of biology that you're an expert at. So you can fence with them on their level because you're a peer. You're as smart as them or more so, and certainly understand each nuance and sophisticated element of chemistry and stuff that your average guy like me doesn't get. But what I wondered is this. I wonder for somebody like you, for example, who can compete with these guys intellectually toe to toe. But it's a very particular science, you're right? You're in a very specific field of expertise that you can just put all your energy in and become, as adept at that as you possibly can. But for a lot of people who maybe aren't either going to take the time to do what you've done or even can do it. Not everybody's as smart, and I'm not good at math. I can't make myself good at math just because I want to be. It's not my strength.
I
But
know a
here's
lot of
what I am.
biologists that say they lack the math gene as well. It's
Exactly. Oh,
that's
yeah,
why they went into
amen.
biology instead of physics, something.
Well,
Yeah.
okay. And so guys like you are needed because you can compete with them intellectually. But I think that what I find curious is, let's go back to the word of the macro. That I think, and I just want to get your take on this, and maybe you can correct me or at least show me a flaw. I think we cede too much ground to the materialists in giving them a presuppositional foundational launching point in a dialogue. Here's what I mean by that. If you were to say to them, first off, everything that they say, everything out of their mouth indicates design. For example, Darwinism or evolution selects. Well, you can't select, you can use that as an allegory, but you can't select without the cognitive ability to draw conclusions based on a couple random options. That's a selection. I want that or I don't want that. That presumes you have free will, obviously. It
Agency.
presumes
Yeah.
that you're,
Right. Right.
but they're using a word. They can't get out of the gate to communicate their worldview without presuming an intelligence or a design or a mind involved in it. And let me give you, I think the biggest example is whenever they talk about the energy, I don't know if this is the right word, you can help me, the energy or the motivation that drives this evolutionary process to continue is survival. Yeah. It just wants to survive. Well, that presumes, I think, that survival matters. That to exist is more important or more crucial or more imperative than to not exist. But if you were talking with animals or things that are biology but don't have a cognitive ability to reason, there is no existence. They're kind of here and then they disappear. They maybe have instincts and they know how to sort of survive because they are just eating and procreating or whatever, but they're not choosing it. It's something that has been inundated into their DNA to just work through this instinct until they die. But they don't sit there and contemplate death or wonder about mortality. Only we do that because we're made in the image of God. They don't believe that. So they say, but it's okay because the momentum behind this that gives it its life force is survival. And I have to say to them, okay, you have to first, before we go any further with the details that guys like only Stephen Meyer can hang with you on, you have to prove to me that survival has any purpose or value whatsoever. You're just assuming that this can motivate things because it's better to survive than not to. Says who? In your world, there is no reason to survive because we're not surviving anyways. We're all dead. We're all eternally ill. It's all going to go away. We're all going to go into a macro disappearance of the fact that we even were here. We're going to an internal unconsciousness. There is no teleology in your worldview, and yet you can't speak without presuming there's value and purpose and an end goal we're shooting for, and you say it doesn't exist outside of your own creating a subjective moment of purpose so you can continue to function. So would you think that I'm misinterpreting the value in saying I'm not even giving you access to the word survival because you're presuming in that it has value, and I
Or,
say to you,
or,
your
or,
worldview
or
doesn't give you that access.
yeah, or that the organism has a wanting towards
That's
that,
it. Yeah, because it doesn't.
which is from whence comes that instinct? That's a question that's not really answered. There was a famous argument from one of St. Thomas Aquinas's five ways. His version of his teleological argument was an argument from instinct. He said if you have insects or fish or organisms with very small, evidently very limited cognitive capability, but they do very smart things. Is that not evidence of something like what we would call in modern times a kind of pre-programming? But where did that, in other words, he's asking the question, where did that instinct come from? We evolutionary biologists take the existence of an instinct towards survival for granted. And a lot of people have commented on this imputation of agency to the process of natural selection. Now, a Darwinian defense of that would be, well, you've got a range, if you have variation in offspring and you have only one, or if say you've got 10 different variants that arise and only one of them confers a survival advantage, then there's going to be a differential survival of that variant, and that's going to be selected in the metaphorical sense because you had all these other things die off and this thing. Okay, fair enough. But when you read them again and again, you find that they cross over the line from metaphor to
Right.
a genuine imputation of purposive
That's what
behavior.
I'm saying. They
Purposive,
betray themselves
yeah,
by having
and
to always grab something from a theistic worldview just to
right.
survive and have a conversation that has any reason to continue.
Well, there's a really well-known quote from a historian of biology at Stanford named Timothy Lenoir, and he's commenting on what's going on in molecular biology, what's going on in molecular biology, because you've got genetic text and you've got genetic code and you've got replication and you've got translation, and you have all these different processes that are defined teleologically with respect to an end goal. And he says that though biologists in the post-Darwinian era have outlawed teleology, they're hard pressed to describe processes at work inside the cell without imputing purposefulness to living forms. And he has in mind precisely all these terms that are used in molecular biology to describe the storage, transmission, and processing of information. Well, we can't describe those things without teleological language because those processes so resemble our own modes of information storage, transmission, and processing from our own high-tech world of digital computing. And so you do have some very striking examples of the incorrigibility of this teleological description, teleological language, where we're imputing purpose and intention. In fact, you can't understand anytime we describe, the anatomy of an organism. Well, what does that hard exoskeleton do for a crab? Well, it's protecting it from its predator. We are always describing things in terms, biologically, in terms of the functions they perform in service of the survival of the organism.
But they have the advantage of it's already here. And then
Yeah.
they just draw conclusions. It's always this reverse engineering. And that's why I was curious. I think what I was trying to get at was if somebody was having a conversation, a theist and a materialist,
Yeah.
that I was saying to myself, I'm not going to be able to be an expert in your field. I'm just not. I'm not going to, not to the level that you are, but I don't know that that's necessary. As long as guys like you exist, so I can call on you to pinch hit for me, so be it. But what I'm wondering is maybe on the larger scale of interacting in the long run, is that what all I need to do is find some flaws in the presupposition in the first place. In that I think that sometimes in us trying to be civil and kind and literally interested in trying to find conclusions that are true, we give up some ground that I think maybe we should back up a little bit and say, wait, before I go any further, you need to defend some things about your worldview first so that I can understand exactly where you got the conclusion that survival matters or that there is no purpose to life. And they always say this, there's no meta purpose, there's no big meta narrative. So you know what we do? No, what do you do? Well, we make our own purpose. We create our own purpose. And that's enough for me. I said, you don't
Well,
get
that gets
it.
you straight to French existentialism, philosophically speaking. Yeah, I appreciate what you're expressing here. I think that as far as conceding way too much ground, the most important thing not to concede is the idea that science must limit itself to materialistic explanations. We explain all kinds of things all the time by reference to the action of agency. If I go into the British Museum, which I did this summer twice, it was great, and I see the Rosetta Stone, and if I'm an archaeologist, maybe it hasn't been, maybe people haven't cracked the code yet. When the archaeologists first looked at that, and when they began to realize that these were informational sequences, they didn't say, well, I'd like to say this was put here by these inscriptions were the product of scribal intent of an intelligent agent. But I can't say that because I'm a scientist, so I have to limit myself to strictly materialistic explanations and exclude creative intelligence as a possible explanation. So I'm going to say it was wind and erosion that created these etchings or some sort of chemical abrasion or something. No, we did not limit ourselves that way because it was irrational to do so.
Right.
And in evolutionary biology or historical biology, when we look at the evidence of, for example, the information stored in the DNA molecule and the whole information processing system of which it's a part, we shouldn't say, well, we've got a code here. It looks like there must have been a master programmer. Well, we can't, but I can't say that. So I'm going to say it arose through undirected chemical evolutionary processes. And what's interesting, I think, and I'm affirming your sentiment. You do not need to be an expert to understand what's going on. This was the great thing about Philip Johnson's books in the early 90s.
Yes,
Darwin
he was amazing.
He approached it as a law professor evaluating evidence without necessarily having a PhD in biology. But he found the flaws in the reasoning and the presuppositionally driven reasoning that was at work that was essentially question begging. When I first met him, he said there was something about the rhetorical style of the defenders of Darwinism, of contemporary Darwinism, that made him convinced they had something to hide. And they were always assuming the pointed issue.
Yes.
The pointed issue was this the product of design or apparent design, or an undirected process that merely mimics the powers of a designing intelligence? And then they decide, we're not going to consider the possibility of actual design because that violates the rules of science. Well, then there's only one possibility left to elect, and they end up winning the argument without ever having the argument. This was the gravamen of his critique, and it's a powerful critique. And I think it's precisely where we give up way too much ground from the outset, and then we're kind of boxed in by the rules that the other side decided you have to play by, and there's absolutely no reason for that to play.
I think what
because it's an open question.
Yes.
Was life the product of intelligence or undirected natural processes? That's the question that interests us. So let's address that by seeing what the evidence has to say about that. And when you find that inside living cells, you are discovering things like digital code and complex information processing systems and exquisitely complex nanomachinery and circuitry, well, maybe we need to back the train up before and say maybe Darwin didn't get the whole story, because really all he did explain was this adaptation phenomenon.
Well, and where this conversation is now leading us is to the transcendent. It's where where the immaterial meets the material and yet has equal value and equal credibility, and almost unarguably the only way this can make sense, at least based on how humans have tried to observe things and draw conclusions. There are certain things that simply, if they don't make sense and they don't seem to work in everything else that we've seen works like this pattern, why are we suddenly deciding not in this case? And let me give you an example. I'm going to do a quick back step into the material one last time.
Can I give you an example of that?
Sure.
And amplify your previous point before you go on, because this is exactly the way I argue the case for intelligent design. That whenever we see circuitry or digital code and we trace it back to its source, inevitably we always find a mind.
Yeah.
So when we find digital code or circuitry in a living cell or in a living animal, absent a sufficient materialistic explanation, and we are absent sufficient materialistic explanations for these types of phenomena, the best explanation is intelligent design. That if we saw this type of phenomenon in any other realm of experience, we would rationally and logically infer that a designing intelligent role. Whenever we see information and whether it's in a hieroglyphic inscription, like at the Rosetta Stone, or a paragraph in a book, or digital code in software, Bill Gates' DNA is like a software program, but much more complex than any we've ever created. Well, we don't, even Richard Dawkins acknowledges we do not have an explanation for the origin of the information necessary to build the first life. So we're absent a materialistic explanation for this fundamental phenomena that always indicates the activity of intelligence. So what should we infer? Most rationally, that an intelligence was responsible for this as well.
Yes.
And it's not, and Brad, you're right. It's not that hard. You don't need a PhD from Cambridge University in philosophy of biology, which is what I did, or in evolutionary biology, or in these fields to follow the basic logic of these arguments and to make a decision for yourself.
Well, and this is kind of,
in fact, the leading people in the debate will reveal presuppositions that are questionable when you listen to them. So recently I did an interview with Piers Morgan, and then Piers asked me to react to some things that Dawkins had said. And then he did an interview later with Dawkins asking him to react to some things that I had said. And I think any intelligent layperson can go back and watch those two interviews side by side and make a decision about whether it's more rational to be a materialist or a theist.
Oh, yeah, indeed. Have you ever debated with Dawkins?
Well, he won't.
So you're in the William Lane Craig category of.
Well, he was challenged one time. He was on
persona non grata.
Yeah, he was on a big national talk radio show, Michael Medved, when Michael was on Salem and had a massive audience. He had Dawkins on, and the president of our institute called in and challenged Dawkins to do a debate with me. And Dawkins said, and I quote, "No," he said, "your people haven't earned it."
Yeah. No, it's always, I'm not going to platform you.
But what Piers Morgan has set up now is a kind of debate in seriatim, indirectly, and I think Dawkins acknowledges he has no explanation for the origin of the universe.
Well,
no explanation for the origin of life, but maybe we'll get there someday,
Which is a materialist of the gaps argument.
Exactly.
I don't know what else to say. And it's literally where I was about to go. So I'm glad that you went ahead and just sort of circumvented that, because I guess in the final question, because I want to get as much opportunity to speak to you as I can, within the material realm, was that question. I said, if you want to talk about the seeding ground presupposition as to whether we should even start backing them up and say, we've decided we're tired of this argument. Now we're going to demand that for you to have the audience with us, you're going to have to prove some things so that we know that we're talking to coherent, logic-driven human beings who aren't determined. So we have an access to volition and drawing conclusions and deciding to change our mind. I got to make sure I'm dealing with somebody that makes sense, or I'm wasting my time with you. And certainly the ultimate in the material realm is the non-material becomes biological life form.
Life from non-life.
Am I right? There is not even a hint as to an explanation for how rocks or chemicals or carbon or whatever it is suddenly became a living life form. I mean, they don't even have a clue.
Either way. The field of studies is known as origin of life research, or chemical evolutionary theory is the branch of evolutionary theory that has been proposed to explain the origin of life, the simplest forms of life, from non-living chemicals. This was an idea that was first formulated in the 1870s by Thomas Henry Huxley, Darwin's English bulldog and Ernst Haeckel, essentially his German bulldog. It was developed further by a Russian Marxist biochemist named Alexander Oparin in the 1920s and 30s. There was a famous experiment in 1953 performed by Harold Urey and Stanley Miller, where they zapped some gases that allegedly simulated the atmosphere of the early Earth, and they got a few protein-forming amino acids. But a few amino acids a protein does not make. You need a whole bunch of amino acids. You need to get them to link together in the right way chemically, and you need them to be arranged properly so they fold into a protein structure that will do a job. Since 1953, I would say essentially no progress has been made on this subject, or no progress has been made in rendering the chemical evolutionary theory more plausible. By about the 1980s, the field was recognized to be in a state of impasse, and there it has stayed for now over 40 years. My PhD work was on origin of life biology and the debate about the origin of life. This is kind of my field. That's why the first book I wrote was called Signature in the Cell. It was about how do you explain the origin of the information necessary to produce the first living cell. And that problem has been left unanswered. People have tried repeatedly, and invariably one of two things happens. Either they obviously fail to account for the origin of information, or they only seem to account for it by presupposing prior unexplained sources of other information. So they formally speaking beg the question. So this is a profound mystery. In 2009, Dawkins was interviewed, 2008, I guess, for a film that came out in 2009 called Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. He was interviewed by Richard Dawkins, and Dawkins got him to acknowledge on camera that no one knows how life arose.
Ben Stine, I think, was the...
Yeah, Ben Stine. Oh, yeah, sorry. Ben Stine was the interviewer, and it was a brilliant interview. And Dawkins went on to speculate that, well, maybe, yes, that's right. He said, maybe there is a signature of intelligence, he said, but that must be the product of life having been seeded on Earth from some sort of intelligent agents on another planet. Now, he's since disavowed that. I think he was quite embarrassed by that interview. But even recently on Piers Morgan, this last summer, he acknowledges that we still have no account for the chemical evolutionary origin of life.
Right. Well,
he says, we'll get there, though. We'll get there. But there's a really interesting logic here, and that is that, well, because science has always been so successful in advancing, we can assume that science will end up answering these questions. But two moves have been made. One, the assumption that science is equivalent to materialistic explanations only. I think that science should be open to all types of explanations, including those involving creative intelligence. So yes, maybe science has already made progress, because what we've discovered is a distinctive artifact of intelligence inside the cell, namely digital information, and that's pointing to intelligent design. So I would argue that the theory of intelligent design is a scientific advance. Beyond that, materialistic explanations attempt to explain things materialistically has only succeeded in those branches of science that are concerned with how nature ordinarily operates. The materialistic explanations have not been successful in explaining the origin of things. We don't have a materialistic account of the origin of the universe, nor could we. If matter itself begins a finite time ago, then whatever caused the universe to come into existence was not material. And so that's a big impasse. And that's something that's what Piers Morgan asked Dawkins about. I made that statement on Piers Morgan, and Dawkins kept punting to physicists saying, well, I don't know, but I'm not a physicist. The physicists can answer the question, but the physicists don't answer the question.
Right.
They invoke a prior non-material state of mathematics to try to answer the question.
Yes.
But math exists in the realm of a mind. So they're really invoking inadvertently a mind, and even the brightest physicists have recognized this to explain the origin of the universe. He then acknowledged that we don't have an explanation for the origin of life. We don't have an explanation for the origin or nature of human consciousness. So there are fundamental kinds of questions that materialism has made no advance in answering, and we shouldn't accord it respect as being on some sort of inexorable march towards all answers to all questions.
That's right.
That's not the way it works.
That's right. And that's kind of what I'm alluding to, maybe I'm being I hope it's not arrogant, but I think it's just sort of being more...
a little pugnacious in the debate. I think
It-
our side should have a little bit more swagger and
well, I
not
think so.
so much, so
Because
much ground. It's
I think so because the truth is, the real hard question that is essential for these questions to even to be explored. Because what's the
it's the
purpose of
reality
living?
of mind. It's the
Yeah,
reality. We know we have minds. This is what turned Thomas Nagel from
yeah,
a sort of a dyed-in-the-wool scientific materialist to still an atheist,
yeah.
but saying, hey, there's something really missing here in the evolutionary
Well,
worldview.
and Anthony flew as well, but
Anthony Flew, who did become a theist,
I
and
got to say
you know,
that I got to give Nagel credit because it is so difficult to walk outside of a cognitive dissonance, and it's frightening. I think to have your worldview deconstructed, especially think about Richard Dawkins. If he suddenly said, "Yeah, I think maybe God's always there," this man has wasted his life
yeah.
on flat Earth essentially
I
ideas.
for friends and people who are interested in the first interview I did with Piers Morgan about asked Dawkins, and he asked me what I thought, and the first thought that came into my mind is I really love the guy. There's something about him that is to me incredibly engaging because he has a great talent for framing issues. You know, the universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if at bottom there's no purpose, no design, nothing but blind, pitiless
Yeah.
indifference.
Well, that's a little rough at the end, but
Beautiful though,
yeah,
because it frames the issue. Is the
yeah,
universe
yeah,
that kind of place? Does it have the properties that we would expect if there's no purpose or no design?
yeah.
Well, the argument in my book, Return to the God Hypothesis, was framed around the issue that he raised. And I argued, no, it does not have the properties we should expect if there's nothing but blind materialistic processes at work. It's fine-tuned for life from the very beginning. It
Yes.
had the material universe had a beginning, a temporal beginning. There's digital code inside cells. None of these things were expected by the scientific materialists and still aren't. And that's why scientific materialism or scientific atheism is getting so weird. And you have people invoking multiverses and space alien designers and
Yeah.
the simulation hypothesis that we live in a computer simulation. It's scientific materialism that's getting weird. Theism has a clear, coherent explanation for the fundamental things we've discovered about biological and cosmological origins, and that is
That's right.
a pre-existing transcendent mind.
Well, and I think this is leading us right where we need to go, which is about the mind, because it's just talk about a mystery. Holy smoke. But there is an answer to non-biology becoming biology. There is a very simple Occam's razor answer. It's a miracle because that's how it would work. That's what a magician does. He counterfeits the miraculous. It's dead, now it's alive. That's a miracle. It's not natural, it's supernatural, so it's still in our realm, but there's another way of engaging our realm that is just outside of the material world. Now, if you have jettisoned that, then there is no answer for you. I can't help you. If you've decided to take 3 letters out of the alphabet because you just don't like them, I can't help you when you don't understand some words. You've removed things that were designed to help you get there. So that's on you. And that's why I believe this, especially, as we're taping this, it's November 5th, 2024. I say that because, this is going to live in eternity. The social media allows videos to go forever. People might be watching this years from now, but it's an election year right now in America. And it could be very, very telling as to whether we're going to have a semblance of a constitution that will remain or actually allow Marxists to be at the realm. But and I'm not making a political statement, I'm making a point about philosophy. The way you see the world and how you live your life is based on your presuppositional worldview. How do I see the world? And from that, you will make conclusions, oftentimes immoral conclusions, if you've given yourself freedom from the Judeo-Christian ethic that the West was founded on. Then you can do whatever you want. You become a totalitarian, you become a Marxist, you become a communist, and you kill whoever you don't want. That's the way the game works. But we saw the hijacking of science really illuminated during the COVID thing, where guys were saying, hey, I'm a virologist, this isn't the best way to do that. Oh, you can't talk. Oh, I thought that's what science was we were seeking answers so we could actually help people. So it has a lot of repercussions when you don't allow literally to seek the facts wherever they might lead you, and they don't allow themselves to do that. So let's move into.
Can I comment on that
Please
word
do.
miracle that makes people really uneasy, or it makes people nervous? A miracle from a theistic point of view is simply an unusual act of God.
Yeah.
Theists from the Middle Ages on, it might be before that, but there was a nice framing of this in the Middle Ages among the theologians. They talked about the difference between potentia ordinata, the ordinary power of God, and potentia absoluta, or the fiat power of God, where God acts discreetly in time in a discernible way as an agent within the created order that he otherwise sustains and upholds. A miracle, from a theistic point of view, is an act of God. If there is no God to act, if the naturalistic worldview is true, and God does not exist, then the probability of a miracle is zero.
Yeah.
If there's evidence for the existence of God, as I argue in my book, Return of the God Hypothesis, indeed scientific evidence from cosmology, from physics, the fine-tuning, the digital code in cells, from biology, you have this ensemble of really powerful evidences and discoveries that have been made about biological and cosmological origins that I argue is best explained by the postulation, first of a mind, and then secondly of a mind that it transcends the matter, space, time, and energy. And I think you have that kind of evidence when you realize that the universe itself began to exist, and from the beginning, it was finely tuned to allow for life. That suggests the need for a cause that is independent, external, outside the universe to bring the universe into existence, and the need for an intelligent cause of the fine tuning of the universe. So you've got evidence for an intelligent, transcendent cause from what we now know about the origin and structure of the universe itself. So
Well, and
puts theism back on the table.
yeah.
And
Well, and
if
if I
there
may
is
be.
a God, if there is a God, just to complete the logical train here, and I'll let you
Yeah.
jump back in, but so if there is strong evidence for God, then there's no reason to discount the miraculous a priori and to say a miracle can't happen, because now if a miracle is an act of God, then miracles are entirely possible
Yes.
if there is a God to act.
Well, and but I think that there might be a correlation between what we've talked about earlier about the different levels or the different definitions of evolution. I think that that when someone says miracle, I think most people perhaps are thinking magic, right? It's sort of this magic thing, this witchcrafty thing, or voodoo, or gods, or fantasy or mythology or something. But I think ironically, when a theist talks about a miracle, we're still talking about the realm of the material. We're just saying this is a rare aberration of the natural order that God decides and every now and again to intervene in, just to let you know I'm still running the show. But it's still in a material realm because he's still using matter to go from non-life to life. So I'm still using material. I'm still using the chemicals that I gave you from the get-go. But I've
But the
decided to
point is that there's
intervene
an
and
I that is using them. That is to say that what we have is an instance of agency, of intelligent
yes,
causation, or the theologians might term it divine action,
yes,
a mind affecting the material realm. And you
yes.
say, oh, well, that's really spooky. We can't have that and be scientifically literate people. But wait, guys, we do that all the time. I'm going to affect the material realm right now. I've lifted a stapler. I'm now going to drop it. If I here's an analogy. If if I'm at that pool table and I'm about to make a shot, and I know the laws of momentum exchange, and I know the initial conditions, that is the angle of the pool cue on the ball and the force applied, I could calculate in theory how ball A is going to hit ball B and affect ball C, knowing the law of momentum exchange. And so, but if someone comes along right as I'm making the shot and shakes the table, all bets are off,
Mm,
because I'm going to get an outcome that is now not something that I calculated.
mm.
But why? Because an agent has intervened into the system, has introduced a new line of cause and effect, starting with the choice of that agent to shake the table.
Yes.
And when theists think of a material of a miracle, they are invoking the act of an agent, a mind affecting matter. But that's not inherently incomprehensible,
Right.
because we do that all the time. We've been given agency, I believe, by a creator, but we have agency. That's indisputable. This was the point of one of the big points of Thomas Nagel's book, is that we have minds. Mind is part of the reality of the cosmos, and materialists have had to write that aspect of reality out of existence to provide materialistic explanations for everything. But we have conscious agency. And if we can affect the material world, if we can introduce new lines of cause and effect, not in a way that was not fully determined by prior material antecedents, because we have free will, there's no reason to think that if there is a God, that God can do the same thing.
Amen.
And so the real question that needs to be adjudicated is
Well, and
whether,
again, back to the naturalistic or the materialistic or the closed system worldview,
Yeah.
is even their beginning, the Big Bang or whatever they reference it now, is a miracle. Nothing blew up. And so that's impossible without.
well, the explanation increasingly is from what's called quantum cosmology, and the argument of Lawrence Krauss popularizing Alexander Velikin and others is that the universe came from nothing.
Yeah.
But their nothing is interesting because they do get back to a point of much of what they use to explain the origin of the universe is in terms of a prior quantum field that's bubbling with energy. But then you ask, where does the quantum field come from? Well, it comes from prior, what was called a super state of possibilities, is the collapse of the universal wave function. All of that is math.
Yeah.
So you ultimately come that you have the material universe emerging from a mathematical superstructure and set of equations. And one of the pioneers in this field, Alexander Velikin, has said, well, before there was matter, space, time, and energy, what tablet could these mathematical equations have been written on? If mathematics is the realm of the mind, then are we really saying that the universe came from a mind?
Yeah.
So
right.
the go-to way of trying to circumvent the problem of the origin of matter, space, time, and energy that's affirmed by the Big Bang Theory and by the singularity theorems in physics and is this quantum, what's called quantum cosmology, but it envisions the universe coming from an immaterial realm of mathematics, which is inherently therefore conceptual and therefore mental. So they haven't eliminated the need for a mind behind the universe.
Right. Well, that's what we need to really cover. I mean, we've done so much wonderful discussion up to this point, and I want to be fair to your time because we're getting closer to the end. How much time do you have? You got 10 minutes? You got 40?
Let's call it another 20 minutes to make sure we wrap this up nicely.
Okay. Okay, nice. All right. Well, let's jump right in then to the idea of the mind, because that's really where I wanted to go this time, or at least to broach it, because it's so incredibly fascinating and mystical and beautiful at the same time. So again, the Darwinist cannot validate or in any way conceptualize how natural selection could create a mind. So would you say that thoughts, this is something that I've used before, and I want to show you something real quick, just to show you how long I've been playing with this. And this, I don't know if you've ever heard of this guy. In the 80s, I stumbled across this guy. It's the first time I'd ever seen this idea. So, and you might think it's, I don't know where he fits in your world, if you ever heard of him.
Bring it on. Yeah, no problem.
A.E. Wilder Smith. You ever heard of him?
Oh, yes. Yes, we have.
I'm looking at this book, I'm looking at this book called The Scientific Alternative to Neo-Darwin Evolutionary Theory, A Cybernetic Approach to Evolution, the Creation of Life, and the Natural Sciences Know Nothing of Evolution. Now, this is the first time I had ever read about a guy that was indicating you can't get thoughts from material. And I think he was crossing the street and he noticed that this it went from stop to go or something. He said, well, what's switching that to let me know one thing, but now it means something else. And somehow he postulated that, wait a minute, the genetic structures are being manipulated by a code, by a language, but that isn't material. Right? When I think something, I can show you a part in your mind that's being illuminated, that's being active. I can show you the hard drive where the material is held. What I can't show you is the guy that has to get on his keyboard and start deciding. I'm looking for apples. Oh, you had it stored there, and thank you for showing that. The computer never stops and says, "I'm going to think about apples for a while." Ever. It needs a mind to begin to input what it's literally trying to discover. All the hard drive does as a brain is hold the information, but this other thing, this soul, the spirit, if you're materials, is the thing that just chooses to go find access to the stored information. And that is the difference between a brain, a mechanical function of synapses and so forth.
Electrochemistry and neuro.
Yeah. And this weird reality that I can conjure up in my whatever it is head. I can picture things, smells, ideas, stuff. What is that? What's that thing? And that is the esoteric, like math. It's true. It comports the reality. It works, but there's no it's not material. Would you agree that using thoughts is a proof of the immaterial is real, which is where God lives?
Well, there's so much to say about all that, but
I
yeah,
know.
I'm a mind-body dualist. I don't think the mind is reducible to the brain.
Right.
And I think there's a body of neurophysiological evidence that supports that conclusion. I think there's the best work in the philosophy of mind supports that conclusion. The question is, how do you get from chemistry to code? But then how do you get from code to the conscious experience of my seeing the blue background on your for your set? I mean, the conscious experience is a fundamentally irreducible to the material substrate of the chemistry of the brain.
Right. Determined.
And what Wilder Smith was first pointing out was that we know what we can see where the information is stored in DNA, but to account for its origin, we can't account for its origin materialistically. And everything we know about the origin of information is that it comes from a mind. And this is the argument that those of us in the intelligent design research community have developed. And Wilder Smith influenced Dean Kenyon, who was one of the guys who Kenyon wrote the foreword to the book, The Mystery of Life's Origin by Thaxton, Bradley, and Olson. So going back to the mid 80s, when people first started to realize that what we're looking at in the cell that is so perplexing to the chemical evolutionary theorist, namely the information stored in the DNA molecule, the information stored in RNA and in the information processing system, that information is a mind product. What we know from our uniform and repeated experience is that it takes a mind to generate information of that form, what they called specified complexity. And so we have direct introspective experience of our minds. We know that our minds have certain causal powers. We know that among those causal powers is the ability to produce speech, language, information, code. Once the code is produced, we can produce systems like computer software and hardware that will use that code in a deterministic way. We're not saying that inside the cell or inside the computer program, there's someone who is consciously interpreting the code, but there must have been a conscious agent to produce the code. That's the DNA argument. Now, the larger discussion of mind-body dualism, or the philosophy of mind, do you think that the mind is just a computer made of meat, as Marvin Minsky said, the great pioneer in artificial intelligence? Or do you think that the mind is using the brain as an instrument of thought, as Sir John Eccles, the great brain physiologist, and Sir Karl Popper wrote in a book that they wrote about the mind and the brain? There's two views, and I've come to the view of the dualistic view, that the mind is using the brain as an instrument of thought. There's a whole lot on this. There's a little book called The Mysterious Matter of Mind that may still be available on Amazon. And if your readers are interested in some of the brain physiological experiments that led people like John Eccles, one of the great brain physiologists of the 20th century, to come to this dualist view, That's a nice little book to get. We also have we have a series that we're doing called Science Uprising, and many of them are about things like the origin of the universe, the origin of life, the fine-tuning, the digital code and DNA. But the first two episodes are with the brain surgeon, Michael Egnor, on this whole question of whether or not we have free will. And it's very interesting looking at some of the evidence that we have for the mind using the brain as an instrument of thought rather than our whole existence being just rooted in the brain. In that Richard Dawkins interview I keep talking about with Piers Morgan, when Piers asks Richard what's going to happen, has he thought about what will happen when he dies? He said, well, of course, I will either be buried or cremated. Piers kind of says, you think that's just it? And he says, well, yes, of course, what else could happen? We have a brain, it will decay. Well, if you see the materialistic view of reality says that our conscious agency is nothing more than the product of the chemistry of the brain. So if the brain ceases to function, there's no possibility of an afterlife because there's nothing beyond the physical that makes us who we are.
Well, do you think that most neo-Darwinists of the Dawkins ilk or Sam Harris, I think Sam Harris is a determinist, I think, unless he's changed, but I don't know if, I guess maybe Dawkins is a determinist, but do you find that
Certainly. Yeah, this is the whole import of his book, The Selfish Gene. The genes are determining everything, and the genes are material.
So would it be, okay, so let's go back to the argument of
materialism and determinism go hand in hand. If there's nothing but material processes, then even our thoughts and our actions and our choices are determined by material processes.
Right.
And if we have a neo-Darwinian account of how we got here, that supports a materialistic worldview that in turn typically supports deterministic ways of thinking about even human agency.
But the ramifications of that, by basically denying, you would have to deny morality, ethics. You'd have to, because you are not responsible for being a serial killer. You're not responsible for
back to Kant used to say, ought implies can. Ought implies the agency, the free will to choose between not competing objectives, but competing courses of action, competing behaviors, competing actions, some of which we would want to deem immoral and others we would want to deem as good. Well, if you're determined in everything you do, then you can't be held responsible for the choices because they're not choices. They're things that are predetermined by genes and environment. And this whole idea of the diminished responsibility plea, the insanity plea that came into our jurisprudence in the 1920s. There was a famous trial, the Leopold and Loeb case in Chicago in 1924, the year before the Scopes trial. These two young men, Leopold and Loeb, were philosophy students at the University of Chicago. They'd been challenged to exercise their will to power by their professor, and they were taking a course on Nietzsche, on Friedrich Nietzsche. And they went out and killed a 12-year-old boy for the, quote, thrill of it. They were caught, they were convicted, and at the point of sentencing, the ACLU sent out Clarence Darrow the year before Scopes to defend them, and he invoked the diminished responsibility plea, and he said, was Dickie Loeb to blame because of the infinite forces that were shaping him millions of years before he was born? And he made an explicit appeal to neo-Darwinian evolutionary, well, it wasn't even neo at that point, it was Darwinian evolution, to say that, look, they're the product, he said, nature is strong and we are all her victims. So the idea was that we were shaped by the evolutionary process. He's granted that they had defective moral machinery, but they weren't responsible for that because essentially the evolutionary process produced that defective moral machinery, and therefore they weren't making any free choices. They were just doing what they were determined to do. And that's where all this came from, this diminished responsibility plea. So there's a direct connection between the evolutionary account of our origins, the materialistic worldview, and the denial of human moral human agency, human free will, and therefore objective morality. All of these things.
It brings me full circle back to when I was first premising the idea of ceding too much ground in that.
Right.
Here's what I mean by that. If we are determined, which means I can't not think the way I do.
Right.
That would mean that if you and I were pretending to have a conversation, and if I'm determined, we are pretending to have a conversation because I can't not think the way I do. And if you say to me, there is no God, and it's just true. And I say, you know what? I've seen the same information you have, and I draw the conclusion there is a God. Both of us has reached diametrically opposed conclusions that we can't not believe because we're determined thus. And if that is true, then we're not having a conversation because I can't be persuaded
Right.
because I'm stuck in a
Yeah.
code that's been put into my mindset, which means why are you trying to convince me of something that I have no control over? And so again, I think that when we seed ground, if you're trying to reach a teleological conclusion that we're actually seeking truth and we're looking at the same data, trying to draw conclusions that have logical coherence to everything else we have ever seen as human beings as to how this
You are
works
presupposing something that makes no sense within a materialistic framework.
at all.
Yeah,
Well,
because
but
you're presupposing the ability for us to think uncompelled without being compelled by prior materialistic antecedents.
right,
That we have the ability to evaluate things rationally without being compelled to our conclusions by irrational or irrational forces. This
right.
is an argument C.S. Lewis made in the book Miracles, and it's an argument that Alvin Plantinga has developed in much greater, with even greater philosophical rigor in his series Warrant and Proper Function, where he says that presupposition of the reliability of the mind, which is the foundation of all scientific reasoning, only makes sense in a theistic framework.
Yes.
That if it's
Well,
totally determined by the atoms in our brain, we have no reason to believe that the thoughts that our brain produces, or even that our brains have atoms. It's a famous quote from J.B.S. Haldane. I articulate a short version of this argument in the final chapter of Return to the God Hypothesis, where I tell you a little bit of my story. And one of the key things that convinced me of theism as a science and philosophy student as an undergraduate was an argument known as the argument from epistemological necessity. That if you're going to account for the reliability of the mind, you need to believe that the mind was designed to be reliable. There is no evolutionary account of the origin of the mind that gives us confidence that the mind is reliable, because in the Darwinian account of things, everything is survival tracking. There's no reason to believe that what our brains do is truth tracking as opposed to survival tracking.
right.
There are things that we can think that will help us survive that may not be true. And so there's a disconnect there. And Dawkins himself illustrates that because he accounts for the origin of religious belief on the grounds that it helps us survive, but he thinks that religious belief is false.
Yeah.
So he acknowledges a crucial case where the mind is producing a belief that is survival tracking, that helps us survive, but which is false, which is to say we can't trust the reliability of the mind on evolution. If all that's at work is evolutionary, all that's at work is natural selection, selecting beliefs that help us survive, then we can't be sure that those beliefs are going to be truthful, because even Dawkins acknowledges that a very important belief that most people have, namely that there's a God, is false, but we hold that because evolution programmed us to accept that belief in order to help us survive, even though it's false.
Well, and it brings us full circle to my original premise, is that there is not a lack of evidence for God or the supernatural. What there is a lack of proper interpretation of the evidence because you've chosen to discard it. And that's what I meant by the fact that if you believe you're determined, then you shouldn't have arguments with people. You shouldn't even talk to them because there's nothing to learn here. We're just spewing in communicative devices without any conclusion that can lead us to changing our minds, because we can't. And once again, he said survival.
Right? Yeah.
Well, let me tell you though where this does come into play as we get close to the end here of our conversation. But here's the big answer to this element of observation that we have to bring into play. The consequences of these choices are destroying humanity in many ways, especially our youth. When we look at the transgender scenario, where what is used to be called anxiety, puberty, changing into adulthood, and the chemicals that create things in your mind and your thoughts and your peer pressure, whatever, that causes difficulty to move into adulthood. We used to kind of try to figure out how to navigate that, how to get you through that. But now we're saying, well, let's chemically castrate you. Let's fix it by mutilation. It's horrific. And these wrong conclusions that Darwinists have inculcated into culture is killing people. It's crimes against humanity. Yes, Darwinism, atheism is the original religious cult. You are creating God in your image and you're killing people. And I found this study that you probably are familiar with. It says this: a recent Harvard study of anxiety and depression in young adults, 36% reporting having little or no sense of purpose or meaning, which is what we are trying to contemplate this whole time. Why are we having any discussions unless we're getting somewhere? We're trying to reach an end goal that makes sense and satisfies us. Reported having little or no sense of purpose or meaning in life, and this absence strongly correlated with depression and anxiety. There's a consequence to us not finally coming to the atheists and the materialists and saying, I'm sorry, there's too much at stake for you to stay secure in this scenario because you're killing people now. And so I look, I don't want to be, I get passionate and I hope I'm not being over dramatic, but I wanted to get your thoughts on that particular study, if you were familiar with it, and maybe even from your dualism and your exploring life through the biological realm and so forth, and believing in God. What is your take on the existential consequences of this lack of teleology or meaning in life, and how it's affecting the earth, really?
Yeah, this is I am familiar with this study. It's called On the Edge. And it is really fascinating, as you say, that what the researchers found was that 36% of young people, I think it was the 18 to 30s type of age range. What the researchers found was that 36% of young people reported having frequent doubts about whether their own lives have any meaning or purpose. And they were studying young people that were experiencing anxiety and depression. So the study also showed that there was a connection between this, what I call a metaphysical anxiety, a doubt about whether there's an ultimate purpose to the universe and therefore to their lives, and the affective or the subjective experience of feeling chronically anxious and chronically depressed. Now, when I saw this, I kind of lit up because this was my own experience as a teenager. And I had this recurring, to me at the time, unanswerable thought: what's it going to matter in 100 years? What can anything I do, what consequence does anything I do ultimately have? In 100 years, I'm going to be dead. And likely, eventually most graves go unvisited. We're all forgotten. So, and as I've thought about this, later philosophically, I mean, this really troubled me so much that I thought that I might actually be insane, because I didn't see other people around me having these troubling thoughts. And I wondered one day, they were invasive thoughts. I didn't want to have them. I couldn't answer the question. And one day I just had another thought, which is, maybe this is what it means to be insane. And so I had anxiety about whether or not I was insane based on a metaphysical question that I couldn't answer. And it was ultimately coming to faith that helped me begin to address this question and realize that it was a legitimate question, and that the reality of God and my encounter with God changed everything with respect to those metaphysical questions. But if you think about it philosophically, it makes sense. The reason that young people are struggling with this, the reason I struggled with it, makes sense, because nothing can mean anything to an atom or a molecule,
Yes,
or a rock or a planet. Things only mean things to persons. And so if there is to be meaning, there must be persons. There must be someone to whom we can mean something, and there must be someone to whom we can mean something, and somebody that can mean something to us. But the problem is we all die.
yeah.
And so if there is to be lasting or enduring meaning, there must be a person whose existence supersedes ours, transcends ours. And therefore, the God question becomes critical to what Viktor Frankl, the great Jewish post-Holocaust psychiatrist, called man's search for meaning. Just as there must be a God for there to be miracles, there must be a God for there to be lasting or enduring meaning. And the French, because only then will there be a person to whom we can mean something and who can mean something to us eternally, in a lasting way. The French existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre was paraphrased, this isn't an exact quote, was paraphrased to say, without an infinite reference point, nothing finite can have any lasting or enduring meaning. And moreover, that infinite reference point must be personal. But if there is an infinite reference point which is personal, a being whose existence is the basis of our existence, whose purposeful creation is the basis of purpose in the universe, and whose eternal existence is the basis of eternal meaning, because there will be lasting and enduring meaning in personal relationships, then that changes everything. Now, that may seem like a tall order to people of a materialistic mindset, but as I've argued in the most recent book, there is very compelling evidence for the existence of a transcendent, intelligent agent as the best explanation for the origin of the universe and the structure of the universe and the origin of life, the things that we've discovered about biological and cosmological origins. And there is, in addition, I think, very strong philosophical arguments about the need for the epistemological necessity of God as the reliability of the mind. There's a moral argument that I find very compelling. And then many, many people have had subjective experiences of God, I would argue, through the Holy Spirit, or just a native awareness through their conscience or other things of an immaterial realm that points them to God. So I think that the case for theism is very strong. And if you look at that evidence and those arguments in a deliberative and cumulative way, I don't think the God conclusion is a hard one to reach at all. And therefore, I think the whole question of meaning is back on the table. The thing is, troubling young people need not trouble them if they come into a relationship with a God who cares about them and who values their life as having meaning and purpose, is offering, as Jesus Christ himself did, eternal life.
Well, and I think, though, that, again, the materialists, I think, shoots themselves in the foot because they create a structure about how they're allowed to think and then get, a little confounded by why they can't draw larger conclusions. And I think that what's interesting to me is the evidence for God. Part of the proof of that is in the way they behave. It's like, I know you don't believe that free thought and volition and the ability to think differently and change your mind because you're determined, and yet you have a conversation with us as though you can change my mind, and as though there's an end game that you think I need to find and accept.
And as if your own thoughts and conclusions are based on a process of rational deliberation, rather than an irrational, deterministic process that determines your thoughts and conclusions irrespective of logic and evidence.
That's it. But they have to fool themselves in pretending that we're having an actual dialogue that's dealing with objectivity and the opportunity to
I will tell you, Brad, that one of the arguments that really convinced me of the reality of God, of theism as a philosophical system, but then as the reality of God, was this argument from epistemological necessity, the need to account for the way the mind functions on the basis of having been designed, but also this what C.S. Lewis called the self-contradiction of the naturalist, that any system of thought that denies the rationality of thought is self-contradictory and therefore untenable. And materialism or naturalism is such a system of thought. And yet that is the dominant thought form that rules our culture, or at least our elite academic culture today. Although I would say that's changing. I think both in philosophy and in science, theistic understandings of reality are ascendant, and there's a growing network of very great philosophers and scientists who have a theistic worldview, very strong, and have very strong reasons for that. So I think we should have a little swagger. There's the best arguments are on the side of the God hypothesis, as I call it.
And that's certainly a great hopeful thing, especially in this day and age where we need some hope. There's been such darkness, so there's been such almost, well, I believe a demonic influence worldwide that just it seems to be so rich and darker and deeper, that it's causing people's like a Jordan Peterson or a Joe Rogan to rethink the idea. I mean, not that they're the equivalent as to the standard, but they have such
The God
compelling
question is coming into the center of culture in a new way.
everywhere. And
And
people
you know,
people aren't automatically
yeah,
discounting it as archaic. They're now
yeah,
rediscovering it like this is really the ultimate conclusion that is necessary, because when the atheist has to constantly counterfeit meaning to function, he's showing that this only makes sense with a God, the ultimate mind, the architect, the designer, the engineer that put things into place and that gave you access to see them and observe them. And you have to live like that. And you continue to say, but there's no meaning in the end, but you can't stop
yeah.
acting like there's meaning,
Right, right.
because there
No,
is.
I love these. These are called presuppositional arguments for the existence of God. And I love those arguments. They influence me very powerfully. And I also think they're great evidential arguments from
Yes.
science. Both the scientific and the philosophical deliberation, I think, leads you to the God conclusion.
Yes.
It sometimes takes some time. It's sometimes, for me, my conversion was anything but a Damascus Road experience. I took roughly 7 years to settle in a sense of confidence about faith, but it happened. But if you think about just what you're talking about, trying to make sense of consciousness on materialistic grounds doesn't work.
Doesn't
Trying to
make
make sense
sense.
of the reliability of your own mind on the basis of Darwin of it being programmed by Darwinian processes doesn't work. So these deep questions, if you take time to think about them, how did you get a material universe where matter itself begins to exist from matter? Well, how could matter cause itself to come into existence? That doesn't make sense. There must be something separate or transcendent from the universe. There's a strong cosmological argument. There's a strong epistemological argument. And the design argument to me is the one that just, absolutely seized me. That's why I did my PhD on origin of life. But if you've got, Bill Gates' DNA is like a software program, but much more complex than any we've ever created. Well, then what should we conclude
Yeah.
from the discovery of digital code functioning like software inside a cell when we know that software always comes from a programmer? Should we not conclude that there was a master programmer for life? So stop and think about some of these things. They're all around us. And I think you'll realize that God is not very far away.
Amen.
And the rationality, and that you have reasons to believe in him that are very compelling, that you would accept in any other realm of experience if you stopped and thought about it.
Well, and the two, last elements I would throw into that is, if an atheist cannot live or function in their life, literally behave in ways that are without purpose and objective observations and try to draw conclusions, if they can't do anything that seems to betray their supposed materialistic and deterministic point of view, but in fact have to live differently, perhaps they're being drawn. Perhaps they were made for another earth, another world,
We
another
all
place.
live as though our minds are reliable, but we can't account for the
And
reliability
account for them, and God is there. And thank God
apart from a prior designer. We all live as though there are objective moral
that's
principles.
right.
And yet
Well,
we deny the existence of same in our explicit philosophy. If we're materialists, we have to be relativists and say that moral propositions are just expressions of individual preferences or the
that's right.
preferences of different groups, but we do not treat them that way. And whether we're on the left or on the right politically, we all come down on certain things that we think have a moral basis that applies to everyone. And as soon as we act that way, we're acting in a way that's inconsistent with our materialistic philosophy. But we
Yeah,
are
and you
acting in a
should
way
be
that's consistent
happy.
with the idea of God. Yeah.
But if you were a true scientist, not just lip service, you truly followed the evidence where it leads, I would think you would find it wonderful and fascinating to say, there's God? I think that's an interesting discovery. Why wouldn't that be a beautiful and amazing, compelling conclusion that is satisfying and important, unless it's a spiritual realm that you do not want to involve yourself in because you don't want to bow the knee to something bigger than yourself. And that is the ultimate pride, which is the ultimate sin. And it's what kept many people away from Christ, but it's what also drawn many in. Let me ask you one quick last question for my subscribers so I can let you go. Thank you for all this time, this incredible insight. Again, maybe I can beg you to come on again and we can talk about morals and other things like that. But if you were to leave a special last piece of information, I was curious. So tell me, if is there one really exciting prediction in the intelligent design movement that you think is going to occur soon to make another proof that there must be a design involved in the natural order, because we think that because of this is about to take place. Something really exciting that's on the precipice of being
Well, we're-
revealed that you'd like
I'll
to
tell you
hear?
about two things that are forthcoming, and both of which are exciting, and both of them have to do, I think, with, as you were saying, the beauty of the evidence of design that we have. One is one we're working on a multi-volume set of scientific essays called Unexpected Genome.
Hey guys, I'm interrupting my own interview. If you want the answer that you haven't heard yet, go to bradstine.com and join one of the 3 tiers. It is the militia of the mind, it is the warrior level, or it is the special forces. And then you'll get all kinds of special content and bonus answers to make you smarter than you could ever imagine. Go there now, jump on and join the Mighty 10,000. Well, folks, I thank you for coming out here. Thank you, Dr. Meyer, Stephen Meyer. Return of the God Hypothesis. You got to get it. You got to get Signature Cell. You got to get Darwin's Doubt. You're going to get the new books he's got it coming out. Go to his, I don't know, what's your website in case people want to donate or participate?
Well, the best website, I think, is probably returnofthegodhypothesis.com, because you can navigate from there to all our other websites. So that's a good place to start. And I thank you for the compliments, but I also will tell you that I can't tell jokes. So you keep doing what you're doing. I've got terrible timing. I always have. So, it's fun to talk between the two disciplines, And,
Well,
and you,
yeah, and
you
I
do
appreciate
such a
that.
great job of bringing deep ideas into your comedy. I always really enjoy that,
Well,
because
thank you.
you make people stop and think, but you do it with humor, rather than argumentation, which is a completely different skill, but it's important.
Well, I appreciate that. That's a high honor of coming from you. I really do respect you so immensely. And any guys like you that are just doing William Lane Craig's, guys of that level of acumen that just are such an honorable representation of Christ. And so if in the meantime, when you get to take time off of your 12-hour scientific sessions of inquiry and so forth, and if I can make you laugh or bring some fun and some humor into it, then that's my role. That's my part of all of this, as well as, I hope, inspiring other people to see that truth matters. Free speech is crucial. Religious liberties are absolutely necessary to be a free people, and to have good science means we have to be able to not be limited ever by thinking freely, no matter where that leads. And nobody does it like Stephen C. Meyer. So, folks, thank you for coming on Brad Stine Has Issues. If somebody ever says you're being politically incorrect, always thank them for the compliment. Remember, you want to be a free thinker. And if you're a Christ follower, you're the last truth teller on earth. So speak boldly,